He raised his hand first, eyes sharp, answer ready. But the teacher called on everyone else, pretending he wasn't even there. When he finally spoke, the class laughed, and the teacher said, "Don't waste our time." What none of them knew, the same boy they silenced was about to have his words quoted by NASA. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The bell rang sharp at 8:15 a.m., and the hallway chatter of Jefferson High gave way to the ordered shuffle of students filing into classrooms. In room 204, sunlight streaked across dusty blinds, illuminating the chalk-dusted desk of Mr. Granson, the school's veteran science teacher. He had a reputation sharp-minded, sarcastic, and though rarely spoken aloud, harshly selective about whom he deemed capable. Marcus Ellison sat in the second row, his worn notebook balanced on his knees. At 17, he carried himself with a quiet restraint, a boy always on the edge of saying something but never quite being allowed to. His dark brown eyes scanned the diagrams on the whiteboard: planetary orbits, elliptical paths, gravitational pulls. The subject wasn't difficult for him. On the contrary, it thrilled him. Space wasn't just a class unit, it was his obsession. Mr. Granson tapped his marker against the board and asked, "All right, who can explain why Mars has a longer orbit around the sun than Earth?" Hands shot up, mostly the same ones, mostly white students. Marcus hesitated for only a beat before raising his hand too, his palm steady, his gaze fixed forward. But Granson's eyes swept past him as though he wasn't there. "Yes, Allison," he called on a blonde-haired boy in the back. "It's because Mars is farther away from the sun, so it takes longer to go around," Allison replied, almost lazily. "Exactly," the teacher said with an approving nod. "Nice and simple." Marcus lowered his hands slowly, pressing his lips together. He had been ready to explain not just distance but orbital velocity, Kepler's laws, layers deeper than what Allison had said. But his chance evaporated, like it always seemed to. This wasn't new. Marcus could recall dozens of times when his hand had hovered high in the air, only to be invisible in Mr. Granson's eyes. Sometimes the teacher looked directly at him, and still moved on to someone else. The sting wasn't just in being ignored, it was in seeing others praised for answers. Marcus knew he could give more thoroughly. Invisibility had become routine. Yet Marcus's notebook told another story. At night, when the neighborhood was quiet and the sky stretched open, he filled page after page with calculations, trajectories, imagined spacecraft designs, communication equations. His mother once peeked into his room at 2 a.m. to find him asleep at his desk, cheek pressed against a sketch of satellites orbiting Saturn. For Marcus, the stars weren't distant, they were companions. But inside room 204, those companions might as well have been galaxies away. Later that morning, Granson posed another question. What is the significance of radio waves in space exploration? Marcus's hand shot up instantly. He knew this one. He had studied it last night, fascinated by the way deep space probes communicated across billions of miles. His heart quickened with anticipation. "Anyone?" Granson asked, scanning the room. Marcus's arm stretched higher, as if he could force himself into visibility. "Caroline," the teacher said, pointing to a girl 2 seats over from Marcus. Caroline fumbled. They're like signals?" "Correct," Granson affirmed, though her answer was barely a fraction of the truth. Marcus felt his chest sink. He had wanted to explain how radio waves carried compressed data, images, measurements, coded signals, and how the delay in transmission was one of NASA's greatest challenges. Instead, his voice was locked inside, unheard. As the class droned on, Marcus's thoughts drifted to the previous summer, nights on his porch staring through a second-hand telescope, tracing Jupiter's moons. He remembered the way he whispered to himself about possibilities: solar sails, long-duration communication, new propulsion methods. In those moments, his ideas felt alive. But in this classroom, under this teacher, he was reduced to a silent observer of his own brilliance. And it wasn't only about science. He noticed patterns. When white students gave clumsy or incomplete answers, Granson treated them like prodigies. When Marcus tried to contribute, he was overlooked, as though intelligence was something his skin disqualified him from possessing. Subtle, quiet, almost deniable, but constant. The bell finally rang, scattering the students into the hallway. Marcus packed his books slowly, his hand lingering on his notebook. He heard Allison bragging to friends. I crushed that orbit question. Caroline laughed about being called on for the radio thing. Marcus didn't laugh. He pressed the notebook against his chest, the one place his thoughts still mattered. That afternoon, he sat in the cafeteria with his best friend Devon, who noticed his silence. "Man, you okay? You've been quiet." Marcus shrugged. "Just tired." But he wasn't just tired. He was weary in a deeper way. Tired of the invisibility. Tired of feeling his mind was too big for the space he was allowed to occupy. When the final bell dismissed the day, Marcus walked home along cracked sidewalks, past chain-link fences, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. At home, his mother greeted him with a hug, her warmth a contrast to the cold dismissal of the classroom. "You eat yet?" she asked, studying his face. "Not hungry," Marcus muttered. Elaine Ellison knew better than to press. She had seen that look before, the one that meant her son was carrying something heavier than homework. She let him retreat to his room, where the glow of his small lamp illuminated the notebook again. Marcus flipped to a blank page. His pencil moved quickly, equations forming, sketches unfolding. His mind worked tirelessly, refusing to let rejection silence him completely. Still, the earlier moments gnawed at him, the raised hand ignored, the question stolen, the truth that he was unseen even when standing right there. He whispered under his breath, not to anyone in the room but to himself. One day they'll listen. But as the night deepened, a darker thought crept in, one he rarely allowed himself to linger on. What if no one ever did? What if brilliance wasn't enough to break through the walls of bias? His pencil slowed. For the first time, Marcus questioned not the universe, but his place in it. He stared at the page, where numbers blurred under his tired eyes. The silence around him felt heavier than usual, pressing in. He closed the notebook, sliding it under his pillow, as though hiding his thoughts would protect them from erasure. The stars outside his window blinked faintly against the night sky, indifferent yet constant. He wondered if they cared, or if he was just another unseen spark among billions. And as he drifted into uneasy sleep, the question burned in his chest, not about Mars or radio waves, but about himself. Did his voice even matter? He would wake the next morning still carrying that doubt, unaware that the very silence forced upon him was about to set in motion a chain of events he could never have imagined. The morning after the question that gnawed at him, Marcus woke before his alarm, the gray light of dawn cooling the room. He lay still, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, and the scattered tap of raindrops against the window. Under his pillow, the notebook pressed against his cheek like a secret he wasn't sure he was allowed to keep. He pulled it out and opened to the last page, where a half-formed equation drifted lonely across the paper. He added a line, then another, letting the symbols pull him into a world where he could say everything without asking anyone's permission. Down the hall, his mother called. "You up, baby?" "Yeah," he said, closing the notebook but not putting it away. "I'm up." Elaine Ellison was already dressed in a navy polo and soft-soled shoes, the uniform she wore for her shift at the nursing home. She studied him as he came into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder and the notebook tucked tight under his arm. "You look like you barely slept." Marcus poured cereal and shrugged. "I slept." Elaine angled the coffee pot and didn't pour. "You gonna tell me why you're carrying that notebook like it's a passport?" He glanced down. "It's nothing, just school stuff." "Uh-huh," she said, warmth and skepticism braided together. "You keep writing, even when folks don't see you. Don't let them decide what you get to sound like." Marcus tried to smile, but it snagged. "Kinda hard to sound like anything when nobody calls on you." Elaine took a breath, stepped closer. "Your father used to say a wall only tells you where the door ain't." He'd run his hand along brick till he felt a seam. "He had patience," Marcus murmured. "He had stubborn," she corrected, a small grin. Then her face sobered. "I know what it does to you. The quiet kind. The kind that makes you think you're imagining it. But I see it, Marcus. I see you, and I know what that room is doing." He looked at her, at the little lines near her eyes, at the way she steadied her voice. "Does it ever stop? The world? No. But it can bend." She tapped the notebook. "Sometimes you're the one doing the bending." On the walk to school, he replayed the class hour from yesterday, the way Mr. Granson's gaze had slid past him twice, and the heavy stillness it left behind. He wanted to arrive early and disappear at the same time. By the first bell, he had decided not to raise his hand today. The decision felt like laying down a piece of himself and stepping away. In room 204, Rain drummed a dull rhythm on the windows. Granson clicked the projector to life and began a lecture on electromagnetic spectrum basics. Marcus opened the notebook instead of his textbook, and the page bloomed with a line of thought he'd been nurturing. How data compression could conserve bandwidth for deep space communications. He drew a tiny diagram of a satellite, then arrowed a path to a ground station, labeling the bottlenecks. He heard the teacher ask, "What wavelength band does the DSN primarily use for uplinks?" And he didn't raise his hand. Across the aisle, Allison answered, "X-band," and got a good tossed back like a dog treat. Marcus kept writing. Each line he put down felt like a pressurized breath easing out. He jotted a question to himself. What if signal noise could be anticipated with machine learning on board? And underlined it twice. No one interrupted him. No one asked for proof or permission. He felt relief first, then a hollow echo, where the urge to speak usually lived. The hollow deepened when the guidance counselor slid a note through the door mid-period. Attendance office, Granson read. Ellison, go. In the narrow office with faded college pennants, Miss Kim, the counselor, smiled with tight lips. Marcus, have a seat. She slid a paper across the desk with practiced gentleness. Teachers submit mid-quarter feedback. This came in from your science class. Marcus read the typed line. Participation needs improvement. Avoids engagement. Confidence lacking. His jaw flexed. Avoids engagement? I'm not saying I agree, Miss Kim offered quickly. But it can impact eligibility, AP science recommendations, scholarships. He stared at the paper. You know he doesn't call on me. I hear things, she said carefully. But there's nothing concrete to file a complaint on. It's subtle. He tasted metal in his mouth. Subtle feels like a slow leak. You don't see it, but it ruins the whole place. Miss Kim folded her hands. Have you tried speaking up more assertively, advocating for yourself? By doing what, standing up on the desk? His voice stayed even, but his hands curled on his knees. I mean, asking for a meeting. Maybe bringing your mother. He pictured Elaine looking small in a plastic chair beneath the Jefferson High crest, explaining to a man with a long record and longer confidence that her son deserved to be seen. The image twisted. I'll think about it. As Marcus left, Ms. Kim added, You're one of the brightest students I've met here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. It should have helped. It came like a flower pinned to a sinking ship. Back in class, he refolded the feedback slip until it was a hard rectangle under his palm. He told himself again he wouldn't raise his hand. He would preserve his energy, build his own world on paper, and let the class move around him like a river around a stone. When lunch came, Devon slid onto the bench across from him, the cafeteria loud with echoes. You look like you just read your own obituary. Marcus pushed the slip across the table. Devon scanned it, then huffed through his nose. Man, he got nervous. It's almost funny, Marcus said, not smiling. I get penalized for the silence he puts me in. Devon's gaze softened. So what's the move? I write, Marcus said. He tapped the notebook. If you won't hear me, maybe somebody else will one day. Or at least I'll hear me. Devon nodded. That right there? That's the move. They ate in a rhythm of clatter and unsaid things. Before the bell, Devon added, You know my cousin at North State? He said a professor told him the worst racism is the kind that sounds like advice. Don't aim too high. Don't make waves. Don't take it personally. Marcus looked at the feedback slip. Avoids engagement. Sounds like advice dressed as a verdict. He spent the afternoon in a disciplined quiet, letting the lectures wash past. In English, he annotated a poem, and barely heard the teacher. In history, he wrote in the margins of a worksheet. A wave diminishes with distance, but an idea can amplify. By last period, the notebook had new weight, the kind that came from pages filling too fast. At dismissal, the rain had paused, leaving the world rinsed and reflective. He walked home with his hood up, and the feedback slip folded into a small square he couldn't stop touching. Elaine was at the table with a stack of bills and a calculator, her glasses pushed up on her head. You're early, she said without looking up. That usually means either good news or trouble. I got a note, he said, laying it down. She read it, breathed in slow, and set it beside the phone. Say it out loud, she said. Don't let their words live in your body without your words next to them. It says I avoid engagement, he said, the phrase sour. It says I'm not confident. She pressed her palm flat on the table. Their line is not your story. She leaned back. When your father interviewed at the automotive plant, the manager told him he looked too nervous to lead a team. Your father told me he was shaking because he'd had 3 cups of coffee. You know what he did? He started every morning standing at the mirror, practicing his face. 2 weeks later, that same manager told him he had leadership presence. They don't measure what matters, baby. They measure what they're trained to see. Marcus stared at her, seeing the steel under the tenderness. He was good at bending the world. He was good at not letting it bend him first, Elaine said. Her voice grew soft. He'd be proud of you. He'd be mad as hell at this, but he'd be proud. He swallowed. Sometimes I wish he was still here to say it himself. He is, she said, tapping his chest lightly. Right there, now eat something. They shared leftovers, and the normalcy eased the tightness in his ribs. After dinner, he sat at his desk and opened the notebook again. The lamplight carved a circle in the dim room. He began drafting a clear explanation of a concept that had been bothering him since 7th grade. How signal loss compounds over distance, and how redundancy could be structured to anticipate failure rather than merely respond to it. He wrote longhand, line after line, his pen never catching. He paused and for the first time, wrote his name at the top of the page in big letters. Marcus Ellison. It felt like setting down a flag where no one else had bothered to look. He underlined it. Then he added a date. If no one heard him, the record. An unexpected vibration rattled his thoughts. His phone, face down near the lamp, buzzed with a new email. He rarely checked email outside of school notifications, but he glanced anyway. The subject line read, Science Class Participation. His stomach dipped. He braced for another admonishment. But the sender wasn't Mr. Granson. It was a parent listserv auto-forward, the kind that compiled teacher notes for families who opted in. He hadn't realized Elaine had subscribed. He opened it and blinked. In a clipped paragraph, a different teacher, Miss Rivera from chemistry, had written, Marcus Ellison demonstrates exceptional independent reasoning. I invite him to share more aloud. Class could benefit. He read the line 3 times. Exceptional independent reasoning. It was the first time in months he'd seen the word exceptional anywhere near his name. Mom, he called. You see this? Elaine stepped into the doorway, drying her hands with a dish towel. He handed her the phone. She read and exhaled, something like relief, lifting her shoulders. That's the seam, she said. What seam? The one your father would feel for. The little place where the wall gives. He nodded slowly. A small confirmation. It didn't erase room 204, but it proved there was nothing wrong with his voice. He wasn't broken. He was being silenced. Sleep took him easier that night, though not fully. The feedback slip still sat in his backpack like a live wire. When the morning bell rang again, room 204 felt as familiar as a bruise. He took his seat and unfolded the notebook. He wasn't going to raise his hand. He wasn't going to chase approval down a hallway that kept moving the exit sign. Granson cleared his throat and capped his marker. Before we begin, he said, I have an announcement. The room quieted. Chairs scraped forward. Marcus kept his eyes down, but his body tilted toward the sound. We're starting a new unit, the teacher continued, and with it a semester project. You'll develop a proposal on future space exploration. I want original thinking, clear research, practical applications. He set a stack of guidelines on the front desk, the pages thumping like small gavel strikes. This will count for a significant portion of your grade. Around Marcus, murmurs rose. Groans. Excitement. The hush of ambition. His pulse ticked faster. Project. Proposal. Original thinking. The words vibrated in his chest. He felt the notebook under his hand, warm from his skin, heavy with ideas that had nowhere to go but here. Granson added, almost idly, I'll be approving topics, nothing too speculative. Marcus looked up for the first time, straight into the middle distance. A door he hadn't expected cracked open. He could see the scene. He slid his notebook to the edge of the desk, the page with his name at the top glowing in his mind. If he could get this through the doorway, if he could be undeniable, maybe the silence would have to break. Guidelines at the bell, Granson said. Start thinking now. Marcus sharpened his pencil until the wood curled. The project could be the instrument he'd been missing, the shape of his voice in a room designed not to hear it. For the first time in weeks, he felt a clean shot of hope. Then, as if sensing it, Granson's eyes moved over the room and landed briefly, pointedly, on Marcus's closed lips. The hope didn't dim. It concentrated. The bell rang. Everyone stood. Granson lifted the stack of project sheets, and Marcus stepped forward to take one, his fingers brushing the edge of possibility, just as the teacher looked past him and handed the first copy to Allison. Marcus froze, adrenaline flaring. He kept his hand out, steady. Granson's gaze slid over him once more, then paused. "Ellison," he said, voice neutral. "You'll want to read this carefully." Marcus took the sheet, eyes scanning the bolded line halfway down. "Student proposals must be pitched aloud to the class next week." The room swayed, not with fear but with a new kind of urgency. The project wasn't just research, it was a microphone. He had a door, he had a plan, and he had 1 week to step through before the same hand that kept him silent decided whether the door would slam shut. Marcus spent the weekend living inside his notebook. The project guideline sheet lay open like a contract on his desk. Future space exploration, original thinking, practical applications. He mapped ideas in careful branches: propulsion, radiation shielding, autonomous navigation. But every line curved back to the same obsession that had been tapping at him for months: how to carry a clear voice across impossible distance. He filled a page with the title that felt like a dare to the room that wouldn't hear him: Predictive Compression and Adaptive Redundancy for Deep Space Communication. On Sunday night, he drafted the one-page proposal he'd have to hand in. Before pitching, he wrote in steady, plain language: a model where a probe learns the patterns of its own instrument noise and anticipated data, compressing only what's novel, not what it can predict. Adaptive error-correcting codes that change with distance and solar activity. Small bursts relayed through a microsatellite lattice to prevent long blackout windows. He sketched a diagram: a probe as a patient storyteller, the relay net as attentive listeners, a ground station that receives a cleaner truth. He kept the drawing neat. He wrote his name again at the top, bold but spare: Marcus Ellison. On Monday, room 204 smelled of dry erase ink and the damp coats of too many teenagers. The class buzzed with ideas half-formed and bravado fully formed. Granson stood at the front with a cardboard box labeled proposals, tapping it as each student approached. He put on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All right, future explorers," he said, "drop your brilliance in the box. Remember, I'm approving topics to make sure we stay in the realm of what's doable at your level." When Marcus reached the desk, Allison was ahead of him, grinning. "Mine's on a Mars habitat garden," Allison said. "Hydroponics in space. I found this cool YouTube channel." "Excellent," Granson cut in, plucking the paper from Allison's hands. "Real-world concrete. Love that." Marcus held out his page. The teacher took it without looking, set it on top, then glanced down and paused. His mouth stiffened. "Predictive compression," he read, as if tasting something bitter. "Adaptive redundancy." Marcus kept his voice level. "It's about improving the signal-to-noise ratio over distance, cutting down retransmissions." "Place it in the box," Granson said, the tone a light swat. "We'll see." Marcus slid the page into the slot. The box swallowed the white rectangle like water swallowing a skipped stone. The next day, proposals began to trickle back out. Some with green checks, some with red questions. Caroline waved hers triumphantly. "Approved," she announced. "I'm doing space tourism. Ethics and logistics." "Thoughtful," Granson praised. "Timely." Allison got a green check too. "Hydroponics, baby." He winked at Marcus. A few others received red ink: define terms or scale back scope. When the teacher reached Marcus's desk, he set the paper down without a check, and without a smile. A thick red line crawled across the title like a strike through. "Mr. Ellison," he said, tapping the page, "you need to find a topic calibrated to your current competencies." Marcus stared at the red line. "What does that mean?" "It means this," the teacher said, voice still mild. "Reads like something beyond a high schooler's origins. These terms: adaptive redundancy, predictive modeling onboard. Where did you get them?" "I read," Marcus said carefully. "JPL's archive posts, ESA blogs. There's open access stuff if you look. And you've been," Granson gestured vaguely, "trained to understand these posts." "I've been teaching myself," Marcus replied. "For a while." The teacher's fingers drummed the desk once, twice. "There's a difference between parroting jargon and understanding engineering. This is ambitious. Perhaps a bit too ambitious for someone at your level." A low snicker traveled from the back row. Marcus didn't look to see who. He scanned his own words again, hearing in them not jargon, but the hours of quiet they came from. It's not a parrot, he said, softer. It's a problem. Scale it down, Granson said briskly. Maybe an overview of radio bands used by NASA. Something digestible. Marcus felt the heat rise up his neck. He had expected skepticism. He hadn't expected erasure dressed as mentorship. He nodded once, not trusting what might spill out if he spoke more. He folded the paper, red line and all, and slid it back into his notebook. At home he put the pages side by side, the guideline sheet asking for originality, and the red slash punishing it. Elaine set 2 mugs of tea on his desk, then read the title and the correction, her face tightening. What exactly did he say to you, she asked. That it's too ambitious, Marcus said. That I should talk about radio bands.
Elaine blew on her tea as if cooling it would cool the moment.
You know what people say when they hit their ceiling and call it your limit, she said quietly. They say be realistic. Marcus stared at the red line. Maybe I am being unrealistic. She looked up sharply. Is it wrong? No, he said. It's not wrong. Then it's not unrealistic. It's just bigger than what he recognizes in you. She reached out, rested a hand on the notebook. Don't let him define the edges of your voice. Marcus exhaled. The pitch is next week, he said. He'll be in the room. Elaine's gaze steadied. So will you. The week inched forward. In class, Granson began showcasing model ideas on the projector. He projected Allison's garden plan like a triumph. Simplicity, focus, feasibility. He flicked through Caroline's slides, a timeline of commercial space. Engaging, he praised. When a white student proposed space fashion for 0G, the class laughed. Granson chuckled too, and wrote creative in the corner. By midweek, Marcus turned in a revised proposal. As instructed, radio bands in deep space communication. A survey. The words tasted like chalk. He wrote it because he needed to pass. He wrote it with the clean, minimalist clarity that made it impossible to mark wrong and easy to mark small. He handed it in without comment. But he wrote a second proposal he didn't hand in. He worked on it in the hours between homework and sleep, drafting a silent project within the sanctioned one. He called it Voice, Variable Overhead Intelligent Compression Engine. He wrote code snippets in pseudocode, scribbled potential loss functions, noted power draw concerns. He built a private scaffolding for the idea the classroom wouldn't hold. On Thursday, Ms. Rivera from chemistry found him alone in her lab during study hall, where he'd come to escape the drone of the cafeteria. She watched as he adjusted a makeshift antenna he'd rigged from spare wire. Catching a faint hiss of local radio noise on an old frequency analyzer she let students borrow. You're building something inside a place that keeps telling you to be small, she said, leaning on the counter. That antenna says more than your face does today. Marcus smiled, surprised. Just trying to listen. To what? To proof, he said, then shrugged. To anything that says I'm not imagining things. Ms. Rivera lifted a brow. You're not. And for what it's worth, I read your original title, the one crossed out. I saw it on the copier tray before he struck it. Marcus straightened. He left it on the copier? A corner peeking out, she said. I read fast. She hesitated, then added. You know there's a state science symposium in April? Independent research. No teacher approval required for topic selection. She slipped him a folded flyer. If the door here is narrow, find another door. He held the paper like a fragile artifact. Thank you. She smiled. I don't have to agree with you to believe in you. But I happen to agree with you. The words hit him like warm light. He tucked the flyer between the pages of Voice and felt a new thread pull taut toward a different future. Friday arrived with the smell of rain and floor wax. Granson wrote Pitch Day, Monday in big letters across the board, and then turned to the class. Remember, clarity over complexity. Think of your audience. He handed back Marcus's revised survey with a green check and a flat comment. This is appropriate. Appropriate felt like a polite burial. When the bell rang, the room emptied in bursts of chatter. Marcus lingered to ask a question he already knew might backfire. Mr. Granson, he began, could I include, as a small addendum, a hypothetical about adaptive redundancy? No, the teacher said, smile crisp. Don't muddy a passable project with scraps of the other thing. Stay in your lane, and you'll do fine. The words, light as they were, sliced. Stay in your lane. Marcus nodded, walked out, and didn't let himself look back. That night he rehearsed the approved presentation into his phone, timing the clean phrases he hated. The deep space network primarily uses S and X band for uplink and downlink. K-band is increasingly common due to higher data rates, but is more susceptible to atmospheric attenuation. He said it smooth, said it like a good student, said it like a boy who'd been taught to make himself legible to people who had already decided what he was. Then he set the phone down and rehearsed voice into the quiet. He explained the idea, as if addressing someone who wanted him to win. A probe can learn its own noise. It can learn what its instruments will see in normal. So it only tells us the story when the plot changes. It can flex its error checks like a muscle when the sun flares. It can whisper the same message along short paths, instead of shouting one long cry across empty space. It can be heard. He slept for 3 hours, then woke and wrote more, the fatigue surprisingly clean. Before dawn he emailed himself the voice notes with a subject line that made him smile despite everything. If they don't hear you, build a louder truth. Monday came heavy and bright. In the hallway, students clutched index cards and Google Slides printouts. Inside room 204, a portable speaker sat on the desk, the projector humming. Granson stood with a clipboard like a judge at a recital. "All right," he said. "We'll go alphabetically." It meant Allison first. He presented glossy slides of floating lettuce, quoted articles he didn't fully understand, and got nods for practicality. Caroline went next. She paced well, joked about billionaire rockets, and received warm laughs at the right places. A student named Brooke pitched the psychology of isolation in space, and got a thoughtful, important angle. When it was Marcus's turn, he walked to the front with the survey slides, his notebook tucked under his arm. He felt every eye weighing him, felt the teacher's expectations stretch like a wire. He kept his voice even. "My project is a survey of radio bands in deep space communication. It covers S, X, and Ka bands, with considerations for weather, power, and frequency allocation." He clicked through the first slides. He spoke cleanly, precisely. He watched the room glaze with relief. "Yes, this is the Marcus they prefer. Yes, this is within the frame we gave him." At slide 4 he paused. He felt the notebook under his arm like a heartbeat. He could say the line he'd practiced, or he could choose himself in a room that had decided he wasn't his own. He chose. "I also prepared," he said, voice steady, "a hypothetical extension that explores how a probe could—" "Mr. Ellison," Granson cut in. Smile widened for the class. "Remember what we discussed. Stay focused." "It is focused," Marcus said, eyes still on the room. "It's focused on making the message clearer." A murmur moved through the desks. Marcus clicked once more. A simple diagram appeared. The probe, the relay net, the flexing code. He kept it clean, not defiant, just there. "It's called voice," he said softly. "And—" "It's enough," Granson said, firmer now. He stepped forward, blocking the bottom of the screen. "We're not turning this into a graduate seminar. This classroom operates at an appropriate level. Ellison, you're done." The word "done" hit like a gavel. A few students snickered. Someone whispered, "Told you." Another voice, softer, said, "Let him," and then faded. Marcus closed his laptop. He faced the room without the screen to hide behind. "I'm not trying to prove I'm smarter," he said, calm and precise. "I'm trying to prove the signal matters." Granson's expression didn't change. "Take your seat." Marcus did. Hands damp, chest tight. He sat while the next student set up space fashion. Laughter bubbled again, comfortable and light. By the end of the period, the board had a list of top pitches to watch. Allison's garden, Caroline's tourism ethics, Brooks' isolation study. His name wasn't there. The bell rang, and backpacks swung, and the room exhaled, as if nothing painful had happened at all. As students filed out, Miss Rivera appeared at the door, a pass in her hand as if by coincidence. Her eyes found Marcus and held. In that moment, Granson looked up, saw the exchange, and called out casually, "Ellison." "A minute." Marcus stopped at the desk. Granson tapped the proposal page with the red strike-through still paper clipped to the approved one. "I'm marking you down for attempting to present non-approved material," he said mildly, as if explaining a lab rule. "It's a participation deduction. We have to be fair." Marcus's throat tightened. "Fair how?" "Fair to the standards of the class," Granson said, tone warm enough to frost glass. "We don't want to set anyone up for embarrassment." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Embarrassment, he realized, was the tool, not a failure of knowledge but a harness around the mouth. When he finally stepped into the hallway, Ms. Rivera was gone. Students swirled around him. Allison clapped him on the shoulder with a grin. Tough break, man. Keep it simple next time. Marcus didn't flinch. He walked to his locker, set his notebook on the narrow metal shelf, and stared at the spine. The red line on his proposal flashed in his mind like a barrier arm at a crossing. He lifted the notebook again. He had been told to stay in his lane. He had been told the lane was all there was. He had also been handed a flyer that said otherwise, and a mother's voice that said even more. He took a breath that felt like stepping into cold air. Fine, he whispered to himself, not angry, just certain. I'll build it where you can't see it. With his grade already bruised and his voice publicly minimized, Marcus decided to complete voice in secret. Alone, after midnight, no approval, no permission, no audience, determined to make something so clear that even a world trained not to hear him would have to listen. He started the first night with a vow and a chipped mug of coffee. The house settled into its after-hours hush, the refrigerator's soft thrum and the clock's steady tick forming the soundtrack to a private rebellion. Marcus cleared his desk, set his notebook in the center like a launch pad, and wrote voice across a clean page, underlining it once, as if drawing a runway line he intended to follow no matter who tried to wave him off. The math felt different at night. Numbers loosened. Ideas stretched. He mapped loss functions for adaptive error correction. Pencil moving in a quiet sweep. If solar noise spikes, increase redundancy. If distance scales, adjust packet size. If signal-to-noise drops below threshold, split the story into whispers instead of shouts. He built blocks in his head and then on paper, his handwriting steady even as fatigue began to nibble at the edges of his focus. At 11, Elaine passed by his door and paused, her silhouette a soft outline. "You need anything?" she asked, voice low to keep the house asleep. "I'm good," Marcus said, not looking up. "You're building late," she observed. "Some things only build in the dark," he answered, and when she hummed a soft note of agreement, it eased the tightness between his shoulders. She set a folded dish towel on the edge of his desk. Inside it, half a grilled cheese, cut into triangles. "Eat," she said. "Fuel is fuel." He smiled despite himself. "Thanks, Mom." She hovered a second longer, eyes landing on the title scrawled at the top of his page. "Voice," she read. "Now that's a name." "It's what they don't let me use," he said, almost lightly. Elaine's mouth pressed into a line that meant pride, anger, and something like prayer. "Then give it a body." When she left, he ate a triangle and got back to it. He sketched a relay net as dots drawn from an old set of map pins he'd collected, then stretched thread between them to visualize the better path. Many short hops instead of one impossible arc. He taped a strip of paper to the wall with the sequence sense compress, predict, verify, resend if needed. And beneath each word he scribbled the smallest, clearest step that could live on a power-starved probe light years away. At 1 in the morning, the laptop screen warmed his face. He wrote pseudocode in a bare-bones text editor, a flashing cursor a metronome. If predicted data, EGS observed data, send minimal confirmation, else transmit delta with priority. If solar activity held, increase parity bits. If bandwidth reserve, dispatch to nearest relay. He built loops and exits, thinking of survival in a vacuum. Discipline over drama. Where some kids built beats, he built algorithms that listened. By 2, the coffee was cold, and his eyes burned, but a soft thrill kept him anchored. He wasn't chasing Mr. Granson's approval anymore. He was chasing clarity. He paused, rubbed his temples, and let his mind drift to the night sky outside his window. Invisible behind cloud-thick dark, he imagined a patient machine whispering across that distance, its message carrying the bare truth needed to be understood. Earth wouldn't listen, so he would teach his idea to speak to the universe instead. The second night, he scavenged. The back closet produced an old cardboard box labeled garage. Dad and marker faded to brown. Elaine watched him carry it to his room and set it gently on the bed. "Mind if I look?" he asked.
"It's yours to see," she said.
Her hand skimmed the box top, and for a second her face softened into a memory. Inside, a tangle of coax cable, a cracked CB radio mic, a spool of solder gone dull, a stack of composition books with stained corners. Marcus lifted the notebooks like relics. He opened one and found clean, unpretentious handwriting. "Signal hates pride," his father had written on the first page. "It goes where it can go. Make room." A few pages later, "Noise isn't the enemy if you learn its patterns." Marcus sat back, breath snagging. He had expected wrenches and receipts, not a philosophy that echoed his own. He read for an hour, absorbing diagrams of antennas built from scrap wire, notes about tuning for local interference, lines like prayers disguised as instructions. A good antenna doesn't shout, it listens. He ran his fingers over that sentence, the indent of the ink grooves rough under his skin. You found his voice, Elaine said, appearing at the door as if drawn by the gravity of quiet. He was talking to me, Marcus said, barely above a whisper. He was talking to himself, she answered. Same thing when you love a person enough. He looked at her. Did he write a lot? He wrote to fight the feeling he didn't count, she said. You two are built from the same stubborn. Marcus placed one of the composition books beside his own notebook. He reworked a diagram, adding a line at the top. Learn the noise. It felt like placing his father's hand on his shoulder without slipping into myth. With the CB mic and the coax cable, he cobbled a crude test rig that looked like a science fair rejection, and acted like a whispering friend. He ran a local signal through a cheap receiver rigged from parts Rivera had let him scavenge, then simulated interference by placing a small fan nearby and turning it on and off. He charted the effect, scribbling, known disruption predictable, compress around it. The third night, Devon swung by with a shoebox and a grin that didn't try too hard. Delivery, he said. Inside the box, LEDs, resistors, a soldering iron with a frayed cord, and a tiny breadboard with heat scars. Where'd you get these? Marcus asked. My uncle, Devon said. He said, tell your boy to build a lighthouse if he can't get a seat at the harbor. Don't ask me what he meant. He's dramatic. Devon paused, then added, quieter. You good? I'm building a louder truth, Marcus said, half smile. Trying anyway. Devon nodded. Meet you on the other side of it. They bumped fists, and when the door closed, Marcus soldered tiny constellations of components onto the breadboard with slow care, smoke curling like the tail of a comet. He wired an LED to blink in patterns that matched a simple compression routine. Blink blink for confirmation, long blink for delta, rapid sequence when redundancy increased. It was crude, it was miniature, and it belonged to no grade. Money was a limitation that hummed constant. Elaine didn't say no to batteries or a used cable, but her eyes did math with every grocery receipt. Marcus reused everything. Cardboard as backing for hand-drawn flowcharts, elastic bands to suspend his makeshift antenna from a coat rack, a thrift store power strip clattering with second-hand chargers. He learned to cut his work in a way that wasted nothing, time, wire, or hope. I wish I could do more, Elaine said one night, setting down another mug of coffee already stained at the rim. You're already doing it, he said. You're letting me keep the lights on past midnight. She laughed softly. I'm complicit. You're mission control, she nodded, eyes damp and proud. Then do your burn. By the fourth night, the line between sleep and wake felt thin. Marcus worked with a calm that surprised him, his body forgetting to be anxious while his mind made clean turns. When he paused, he would hear the ghosts of school day comments appropriate. Stay in your lane. Don't muddy a passable project. And then he would glance at his father's notebook and feel those words shrink into noise. He assembled a small demo he could hide inside his school notebook. A pocket-sized printout of his pseudocode. A folded schematic. A thumb drive with a simulation he'd written on Ms. Rivera's lab computer. After hours. If asked, he was ready to talk X and K-band. If silenced, he would carry a galaxy in his back pocket. Get some sleep, Elaine urged, as dawn hazed the window. I will, he said, and meant after one last line of code. On the fifth night, the unexpected twist arrived, not as an email or a miracle, but as a brown envelope slid under their apartment door. Marcus found it while reaching for the morning paper. Inside, a library card application, and a short note written in neat block letters. Marcus, ask Jenkins, at the Civic Library for access to the Engineering Journal's computer. She owes me a favor. Or Rivera. He blinked, smiling into the quiet. Another seam, another door. He put the envelope in his backpack, feeling the world widen by an inch. The days blurred, the nights sharpened, and he began to sense that his loneliness wasn't empty, it was concentrated. He moved through school hours with a measured quiet, saving his energy for after dark. In room 204, he sat without raising his hand, watched mediocre pitches collect praise like lint, and kept the burn steady under the surface. If he felt a flare of anger, he redirected it into cleaner code. On Sunday night, he rehearsed his approved talk once more. The survey, the bands, the practical notes. so smoothly that he could recite it even if his mind was elsewhere. Then he rehearsed voice under his breath, just in case the seam widened in front of witnesses. He thought of his father's line, "Signal hates pride. It goes where it can go," and decided that wherever room 204 tried to squeeze him, his idea would find another path. The morning of presentations dawned blue and sharp. Elaine ironed his shirt with unnecessary precision, and when he squirmed, she swatted the air. "Let me have this," she said. "I can't do the math, but I can chase the wrinkles." He laughed, and it released something in both of them. At school, the hallway smelled like floor polish and nerve. He walked into room 24 with his notebook tucked close and felt the temperature shift. Anticipation threaded with the kind of attention that rarely landed on him, unless it was to measure his silence. Granson stood at the front, clipboard ready, a small smile already set, the kind meant for cameras and correction. "Settle down," the teacher said. "We'll begin shortly. Some of you will dazzle us, and some of you will learn the value of being concise." His eyes drifted over the class and paused longer than necessary on Marcus. The smile stayed. It looked like professionalism, but it felt like a hand on a dimmer switch. Marcus took his seat without looking away. He slid his thumb over the edge of the notebook where his father's handwriting had rubbed off faintly onto his own. He felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you've already picked your route through the dark. Granson clapped his hands once. "Mr. Ellison," he said, voice almost pleasant, "since you needed some guidance last time, why don't you go first today?" The room tilted. First meant no time to read the air, no chance to find a seam. It meant choosing in front of everybody, without cover. The teacher smiled wider, as if offering a favor. Marcus stood, notebook in hand, and walked toward the projector. He could feel the weight of a week's worth of nights lead every step forward, and he could also feel the trap, be small and pass, or be whole and be punished. He set his notebook on the desk, opened it to the approved slides, and saw tucked between the pages where it hadn't been a minute ago, a small yellow sticky note he did not write. 4 words in a tidy hand, "If not now, when?" He looked up. Ms. Rivera stood in the doorway, a hall pass in her hand, as if she were checking on equipment. Her face was unreadable. Granson cleared his throat. "Anytime, Mr. Ellison." Marcus clicked the first slide, and without looking down, made his decision. He began with the survey the class expected, then in the space of a breath, reached for a hidden schematic that would force the room to either listen or reveal exactly how far it would go to silence him. He began with the survey the class expected. Voice measured, slide 1 clean and proper. The Deep Space Network utilizes S, X, and Ka bands. The words moved with practiced calm, the kind you learn when your truth has to pass through a metal detector. He could feel the schematic in his notebook like a live wire under paper, the small folded page that meant voice could breathe. Ms. Rivera stood in the doorway with that neutral, steady face, as if she'd simply drifted there on school business. Granson leaned against the desk with his clipboard, and that polite smile, a smile that said, "We will make this painless if you make yourself small." Marcus clicked to slide 2, then 3. He watched eyes flicker to the clock, to one another, lulled by the tidy information. He cleared his throat. "There's also a hypothetical approach." Granson straightened. "We'll save hypotheticals for the Q&A, Mr. Ellison. Keep your focus. It's relevant," Marcus said gently. "It's about clarity." A knock sounded at the door. 2 quick knocks, then the door pushed open. A vice principal stepped in with a stack of flyers. "Morning, folks," she said brightly. "Quick interruption. Student assembly on Friday. Pass these back row to front." She moved down the aisles, distributing paper with institutional cheer. Students rustled, reached, bumped chairs. The neat line of attention broke like chalk in rain. Granson took a stack, thanked her, and looked back at Marcus. "You were saying..." Marcus felt the seam stretch thin. "I was saying there's a way to reduce retransmissions using..." "Actually," Granson said, glancing at the clock. "Let's pause there. We're a bit behind." He turned to the class. "As a reminder, keep your talks concise. Allison, set up. Ellison, we'll circle back if time allows." The room folded back into a configuration Marcus knew too well. Him stepping aside, someone else stepping forward as if that were the most natural motion in the world. He kept his face still, and moved his laptop, careful with the cord. The words "will circle back if time allows" stuck in his ear like gum. Ellison launched into hydroponics with slides of crisp lettuce under blue grow lights. "You know what they say," Ellison joked. In space, salad is a luxury. The class laughed. Granson laughed too, then added, excellent framing. He asked questions shaped like compliments. The clock ticked. Caroline presented on space tourism, opening with a poll that made everyone feel clever. The room warmed to her in an easy way. When a white student pitched zero-G fashion, practicality of Velcro couture, the class dissolved into giggles and even Granson played along, writing create in 2-inch letters on the board. Minutes slid by like coins into someone else's pocket. Marcus sat with his notebook closed on his lap. Beneath the cover, the folded schematic pressed against page edges. He held his poster board hand-drawn flow diagrams, a relay lattice sketched with precision, because he had promised himself tangible proof if screens were denied to him. The board felt heavier than cardboard, a physical weight of being ready. He watched the clock as intently as the projector, measuring how much time remained for a circle back. He counted heads, counted minutes, counted the calculated rhythm of applause. He counted how often Granson's eyes skimmed past him, a glance that never landed. At the quarter mark, a student's laptop froze, and he fumbled with cables. Granson stepped forward to help, filling the time with small talk. Technology keeps us humble, he quipped. That's why we rehearse. He snagged 10 minutes out of the air like it was his to take. At the halfway mark, Ms. Rivera slipped away. She touched the doorframe once, a small private gesture Marcus read as faith, then she vanished into the corridor. Her absence made the room feel colder. Marcus slid his thumb over the notebook's spine and thought of his father's line, signal hates pride. It goes where it can go. He felt his pulse steady. If this door slammed, he would find another. A boy named Zach presented a concept called Space Drones for Moon Delivery, which was a rebranded YouTube video. Granson nodded as if hearing a new symphony. Ambitious, he said. Consider logistics, but good ambition. Then, mercilessly, the classroom clock ate 10 more minutes, while a girl named Brooke clicked through a careful study of isolation psychology in long-duration missions. It was thoughtful, grounded, and the kind of work Marcus respected. He clapped as the class clapped, sincerely, even as he watched the hands creep toward the end of period. He checked his place on the alphabetical list. He had been first. He was now unmoored, floating somewhere near the end, with the detritus of if there's time. He lifted his poster board slightly, testing the balance in his hands. The edges were smooth beneath his fingertips. Every line on it represented an hour he couldn't get back, and didn't want to.
Mr. Ellison, Granson said at last, glancing at the list without quite looking at Marcus. You'll present after. He looked toward the door and smiled wide. Ah, fire drill.
An alarm erupted. Shrill, institutional, final. Students groaned and laughed, scraping chairs back. The vice principal's voice crackled over the intercom, unbothered. This is a drill. Please exit in an orderly fashion. Marcus stood slowly, poster board still in hand. The class surged toward the door. Leave materials, Granson called. We'll resume if time permits. He said it as if time were a kind of prize he could distribute. Marcus held the board tighter. He didn't trust if time permits. He didn't trust the way the word resume could mean forget. He followed the river of bodies out into the hallway, his knuckles whitening around the cardboard. Outside, a gray wind riffled the paper edges. Students stood in lines, feigning annoyance, scrolling their phones. Allison made a salad joke. Caroline snapped a picture. Granson walked the row with his clipboard, performing concern, making check marks that felt like everything else ordered neat, selective. Devin found Marcus in the shuffle and took in the poster board with a wry tilt of his head. You're really holding on to that. It's the only thing that can't be erased with a click, Marcus said. Devin's eyes went serious. You think he's gonna run the clock out? Marcus didn't answer. He stared over Devin's shoulder at the blank school windows, reflecting sky like a sheet of clean paper no one was allowed to write on. The alarm cut, the intercom chirped, and chaperones started herding everyone back inside. Back in room 24, the clock read 8 minutes to the bell. The room buzzed with the messy re-entry after any disruption. Granson clapped twice. All right, people, we've got time for one more quick presentation. He scanned the room, finger hovering as if he might choose at random. His gaze landed comfortably. Zoe? Your poster looks concise. Zoe blinked, startled. Oh sure. She hustled to the front, cheeks pink. Her topic was space food packaging innovations. She spoke fast, eyes on her notes, She'd waited her turn like everyone else. It wasn't her fault that the room had been calibrated to congratulate what it already expected. The clock drained. 4 minutes. 3. Zoe ended to polite applause. Granson looked at the clock and then at the class with a theatrical sigh of regret. Looks like we're out of time, he said, cheerful. We'll pick up tomorrow if necessary. Sir, Marcus said, not loud, not a shout, just exactly enough to reach the only person he needed to. I was first. You moved me. Procedures change when unexpected events occur, Granson replied lightly, already stacking papers, already closing the day like a box. We have to adapt. I adapted, Marcus said, and the quiet in his voice made Devon take a step closer. I stayed on the approved topic. I kept it concise. You said I'd go first. Granson's smile didn't shift. We all make sacrifices to keep things moving. Yours is patience. Caroline glanced between them, a knot in her brow. Ellison rolled a pen between his fingers and looked at the floor. Someone near the windows murmured, "Just let him talk," and then swallowed the rest. The bell rang. It didn't just signal time, it blessed what had just happened. Chairs scraped back. The day resumed itself without interruption. The students gathered their things, their relief, their laughter. Marcus stood at the front of the room with the poster board in his hands, equations and arrows, and careful lines suddenly ridiculous under fluorescent lights. Leave your materials, Granson reminded again. Gentle as a lullaby. He was already erasing the board with long, even strokes, writing the next period's agenda. The last of Marcus's hour evaporated in the chalk dust. Devon met him at the door. You good? He asked, the words a ritual. Marcus looked down at the poster board. He could see the precise circles he'd drawn around error correction routines. The relay lattice dots filled in with a blue pen when the black ran dry. He saw a week of nights. A year of wanting. His name in the corner in small letters like a prayer. He held it a heartbeat longer, and then slid it into his backpack. Yeah, he said, voice thin. I'm good. It wasn't true. It wasn't false. It was what you say when you need your voice to survive the next 10 minutes. Out in the hallway, Miss Rivera stood beside the water fountain, as if checking the pipes. When Marcus passed, she didn't touch his arm or break the rules of performance, but she said softly, sometimes the room is the experiment. He stopped. What did it prove? That you weren't wrong about the noise. Something in him gave. Then set. He nodded once, a tight, respectful bow to reality. Thank you, he said. For what? For seeing the room, he replied. He walked home with the poster board digging into his spine through the backpack fabric. At the apartment, Elaine was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, listening for the sound of his key like always. She turned when he stepped in. Well? He set the backpack on a chair and pulled out the board, leaning it against the wall. The sight of it there made her face harden in a way he'd only seen twice before. Once at a hospital desk that lost a chart, once at a bank teller window that sighed at the word overdraft like it was a personal failing. He said time was up. Marcus said simply. Elaine dried her hands with a slowness that meant she was choosing her words like tools. You were first, she said, not as a question. I was, he said. He told her about the knock, the flyers, the drill, the last-minute swap. He told her about the circle back that never circled. He told her the exact phrasing, we all make sacrifices, and let the acid of it sit in the open air. Elaine leaned against the counter. I want to storm that building, she said, almost conversational. I want to ask him whose time counts. I don't think he'd hear you, Marcus said. He's trained not to hear. She watched him closely. And you? I'm done asking room 204 for permission to exist. They stood in the quiet a beat longer, letting the decision find its shape. Then he pulled out his notebook and opened to the schematic, the one that waited under a week of swallowed words. He set it on the table and smoothed the crease with his palm. He booted his laptop. The startup chime sounded like a doorbell from another world. He typed with a careful urgency, fingers steady. He found the small science forum he'd lurked in for months, the one where amateur astronomers posted backyard nebula photos, and a retired radio tech answered questions with kindness. He clicked Create Account and stared at the username field. For a long moment, he considered hiding. Then he typed, Ellison. He uploaded a scanned image of the schematic, attached his pseudocode, and wrote a post with clear headings, problem statement, approach constraints, hypothesized gains. He included the line his father wrote, Signal hates pride. It goes where it can go, as an epigraph, not a credential. He reread the whole thing twice, pruning adjectives, clarifying claims. He did not sound like a kid seeking approval. He sounded like a thinker presenting work. He hovered over post. Elaine watched him, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking. "You scared?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And no." "Good," she said. "That's how you know it matters." He clicked. The page refreshed. His post appeared at the top of the forum, with the timestamp still counting seconds. For a moment, nothing happened. The world didn't shift. The apartment didn't change. Outside, a bus sighed at the curb and pulled away. Inside, Marcus leaned back in his chair and exhaled a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the first time a raised hand meant nothing. He closed the laptop with a soft thud and stood, stretching his tired back. "I'm going to take a walk," he said, like a person who needed to see a sky that didn't belong to a single room. "Bring your jacket," Elaine said. "It's colder than it looks." He nodded, grabbed his hoodie, and stepped into the hallway. The apartment door closed gently behind him. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, each step a small return to his body. Outside, the afternoon light glazed the street in a pallid gold. He looked up at the pale slice of sky between buildings and thought, wildly, tenderly, of a probe whispering to a relay, whispering to another, until at last a signal landed somewhere it could be recognized. His phone buzzed. He glanced down without hope, expecting a calendar alert or a group chat joke. Instead, the preview line showed a forum notification banner with 10, then 12, then 15 pings, stacking like falling dominoes.
New comment on your post. New message received. New comment.
He stopped on the sidewalk, cars drifting by, the world oblivious. He tapped the screen with a breath he didn't notice he'd taken. In the span of a single block, anonymous strangers began to answer him. One comment linking to a university lab, another asking for a code sample, and a private message popped up from a user whose avatar was a tiny blue meatball logo, and a single line of text. "Is this your original work?" The phone screen glowed against Marcus's hand as the notifications multiplied. His walk slowed to a stop beneath a flickering streetlight, the air sharp with late afternoon chill. He tapped one of the comments, bracing himself for mockery, but instead, "Brilliant framing. You've anticipated redundancy scaling better than most grad proposals I've seen." Another, "This compression idea. Are you seriously in high school? Or are you a postdoc trolling us?" The words sat heavy in his chest, not because they stung, but because they felt like sunlight on skin used to shadow. He scrolled down, and the thread had already stretched into replies, debates, diagrams, sketched by strangers riffing off his equations. His own words, the same ones smothered in room 204, were alive in this small corner of the internet. He looked up at the slice of sky. Anonymous stars above, anonymous usernames below. And for once, he wasn't invisible. When he got home, Elaine was folding laundry on the couch. Marcus handed her the phone, without a word. She set a shirt aside, adjusted her glasses, and read in silence. He watched her eyes move, narrow, widen, soften. Finally she whispered, "They see you." Marcus sat down, his voice almost breaking. "I didn't think anyone would." She passed the phone back. "Sometimes strangers hear the song before your neighbors do." He nodded, letting the sentence root in him. That night, he refreshed the page again and again. Comments stacked like a tide. Some were technical, arguing implementation challenges, asking about energy budgets, probing whether predictive models could truly function on limited processors. Others were simply stunned. "This is the most exciting thing I've read here in months. Whoever you are, don't stop." He typed cautious responses. When someone asked, "Source," he replied, "Independent research, built from open archives." He resisted the urge to say more. The username he'd chosen, Ellison, wasn't exactly a disguise, but it was all the distance he had. By midnight, a private message pinged. The avatar was a tiny blue circle. The NASA meatball logo shrunk down to forum size. The text read, "Is this your original work?" Marcus stared at the screen, heart banging. He set the phone down, paced his small room, picked it up again. He typed, deleted, retyped, "Yes." Then paused, added, "I'm still refining, but the framework is mine." No response came immediately. He set the phone on the nightstand, but sleep was impossible. He lay awake imagining the faceless sender, a fanboy, a troll, or someone who mattered more than he dared to hope. The next morning, Devon leaned across their lunch table and said, "So, rumor is, you finally posted something. That true?" Marcus froze. "How'd you? My cousin's in that forum. He texted me, said, 'Yo, does your boy know he just blew up?' He didn't even know it was you until he saw the initials." Devon smirked. "You gotta work on your pseudonyms, man." Marcus groaned, covering his face. "I wasn't trying to blow up." "Yeah, well, you did." Whole threads buzzing. Some dude wrote a 4-paragraph response quoting your equations back to you like scripture. Marcus dropped his hands. "They're actually listening." Devon's grin softened. "Feels different, huh? Like air after rain. Like I'm not crazy," Marcus said. That evening, the private message thread lit up again. "Your redundancy model is intriguing. Have you published anywhere else?" Marcus typed back, "No. I'm in high school." A long pause followed. "Then high school?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus held his breath. Finally, "Where?" He hesitated. He wanted the recognition, but he also knew exposure carried risk. He typed carefully, "U.S. Midwest. That's all I'll say right now." This time, the reply came faster. "Fair enough. Keep writing. Don't let anyone bury this. Some of us are watching." Marcus leaned back, exhaling so hard his lamp flickered. "Some of us are watching." He read the line over and over, each time with a new layer of weight. For days, the thread grew. Amateur astronomers shared crude attempts to simulate his model. A retired engineer suggested efficiency tweaks. One commenter accused him of plagiarism, but others defended him fiercely, pointing out his careful explanations. The accusations stung. Plagiarist echoed too closely to the erasure he already knew. But seeing strangers argue on his behalf sent a strange warmth through him. People believed him. People defended him without knowing his face. One night, Elaine peeked in while he typed long replies. "You look different," she said. "How?" "Like someone who's finally being heard." He sat back, rubbing his eyes. "It feels unreal. Like I'm still in that classroom, but the walls fell away." She nodded slowly. "Maybe the classroom was never built for you. Maybe this is..." Marcus returned to the keyboard with a steadiness he hadn't felt in months. For the first time, he wasn't writing into silence. Every equation he posted came back with echoes, with curiosity, with something he could build on. The loneliness was still there, but now it was filled with voices answering across the void. By the end of the week, the thread had over 100 replies. A moderator pinned it to the top of the forum, captioning, "Innovative independent research, worth following." Marcus refreshed, hands trembling, and found a new reply at the bottom from a username he hadn't seen before. J. Holloway, Research. The post was precise, clinical, and respectful. "Your framework overlaps with problems my lab currently investigates. If you're interested in discussing further, contact me. Email address in profile." Marcus clicked the profile. The listed affiliation, Astrodynamics Lab, Midwestern State University. He stared at the words until the screen blurred. This wasn't a fanboy. This wasn't a troll. This was a door. He whispered into the empty room. "They see me." But underneath the awe, a new tremor stirred. Fear. If a university researcher knew who he was, how long until his teacher did? Until the whole school did? Until Mr. Granson saw the same equations he had tried to erase now quoted by people with titles? The thought made Marcus's pulse spike. Recognition felt like oxygen, but exposure felt like fire. He shut the laptop, sat back in his chair, and let the silence hum. The poster board leaned against the wall, its edges curled but its truth intact. Outside, the night sky pressed against the window, mute but immense, waiting for signals.
His phone buzzed again.
A new private message. Same avatar. The NASA meatball. This time it said, "If you're serious, send me everything. Tonight." Marcus stared at the screen, torn between the thrill of being taken seriously for the first time in his life and the terror of what it would mean if he stepped fully into the light. Because once his voice was out there, it could never be silenced again. Marcus stared at the NASA avatar glowing on his phone. The last message was still there, blunt and urgent. "If you're serious, send me everything. Tonight." His heart pounded like it was trying to push him backward. He thought of room 204, the way Mr. Granson's voice had cut him down to appropriate, to stay in your lane. He thought of the red slash through his proposal. He thought of the poster board folded like trash at the bottom of his backpack. That was the world he knew, where his words had no place. Now a stranger with the NASA logo was telling him the exact opposite. He placed the phone face down on the desk, trying to slow his breathing. Elaine knocked softly and peeked in. "You look like you're holding lightning," she said. Marcus picked the phone back up and showed her. "Someone from NASA messaged me." Elaine blinked, then sat on the edge of his bed, as if her legs gave out. "From NASA? They want me to send my work." Her hand hovered near his arm, not quite touching. "And you're thinking?" "I don't know if I should," Marcus whispered. "What if it's fake? What if they laugh? What if I'm just—" He stopped himself. "Just what?" "A high school kid who thinks he's smarter than he is." Elaine leaned closer. "Baby, you're not afraid they'll laugh. You're afraid they'll believe you. And then you'll have to carry it." Her words landed hard, deeper than he wanted to admit. He sat there a moment, then opened the message thread again. His fingers trembled as he typed. "I can't share everything yet. Who are you?" The reply came in less than a minute. "Not official NASA staff. Aerospace researcher at Midwestern State University. Collaborate occasionally with colleagues at JPL. Username, J. Holloway Research." Marcus searched the forum profile again. The email was there. A name too. Dr. James Holloway, Astrodynamics Lab. It felt too solid to be fake. Another message appeared. "Your model is extraordinary. Permission to share it with colleagues. Strictly anonymous if you prefer." Marcus froze. Anonymous. The word clung to him like a lifeline. He could hide behind the work. He could let the equations speak without attaching his 17-year-old body. His Jefferson High backpack. His skin that made men like Granson look at him like noise. But another thought cut through. What if anonymity made them dismiss it? What if, without a name, they assumed it was a prank or stolen work? He typed and deleted 3 times. Finally, he wrote, "You can share. But not my name. Not yet." The 3 dots of typing appeared, vanished, appeared again. Then the reply, "Understood. Thank you. I'll forward your framework tonight." Marcus exhaled so hard it felt like his ribs collapsed inward. He placed the phone on the desk and leaned his forehead against the cool wood. Elaine rubbed his back silently, the way she used to when nightmares woke him, as a kid. "Whatever happens," she said, "it's already real. They saw you." By morning his post had exploded. The pinned thread now had hundreds of comments. Users from Germany, India, Canada, all asking for clarifications, sharing half-coded simulations, tagging him in discussions about deep space networks. Devon dropped his tray onto the lunch table with a grin. "Bro, you're trending. My cousin texted again, says your post has more replies than anything else on that forum this year." Marcus forced a laugh, but his stomach was a knot. "They don't know it's me." "Better," Devon said. "Let 'em worship the work. That's what matters." Marcus nodded, but didn't answer. Deep inside, he wanted both to be invisible and undeniable at once. That evening, his inbox lit up with an email from Dr. Holloway. The subject line, "Forward with interest." The body was short. "Shared your framework with colleagues for feedback. Some disbelief, some strong interest. One is forwarding to NASA contact. Will update. J.H." Marcus stared at the words until they blurred. His equations drawn at midnight with scrap wires in his father's old notebooks were now being passed hand to hand like contraband among people who built real spacecraft. He dropped his face into his palms. "I don't know if I can do this." Elaine looked up from the kitchen table where she was sorting bills. "Do what?" "Be seen." She put the bills aside. "Baby, being seen is scary, because it means being accountable. But you've already been accountable to yourself. To your hours, to your work. The rest is just light catching up." He swallowed hard. "What if they ask who I am?" "Then you tell them you're Marcus Ellison," she said simply. The boy who watched the stars and refused to believe his questions were too big. Marcus didn't respond. He wasn't ready to believe it. 2 days later, another email arrived. This one longer, more urgent. "Marcus, I hope I may call you that. I've spoken with colleagues at JPL. They are intrigued, though skeptical. They asked if you would provide additional notes, derivations, simulations, anything to demonstrate validity. I will vouch for you, but they want to see the work themselves. Please advise." Marcus's hands shook. He reread the lines a dozen times. NASA wanted to see his derivations. NASA. He printed the email and showed it to Elaine. She stared at the page, like it was written in fire. "They're asking you to prove yourself," she murmured. Marcus dropped into a chair. That's the part I'm scared of. Why? Because what if I can't? His voice cracked. What if I'm wrong? Or what if I'm right? And they still don't believe me? Because I'm just… He cut off, biting his lip. Lane reached across the table and took his hand. Listen to me. The only people who ever told you your voice didn't matter were the ones scared of it. If these men and women see what you've written and still doubt you, that's their noise. But it's not silence anymore. It's not erasure. Marcus pressed his hand to his forehead. It doesn't feel like enough. It never feels like enough when you've been told you're not enough, she said softly. He nodded, unable to speak. That night he opened his files and began organizing. He scanned handwritten pages, typed up explanations, attached pseudocode simulations. He labeled everything cleanly: redundancy scaling, compression function, solar noise case study. His laptop fan whined under the weight of it. When he finally attached the zip file to an email, he hovered over send for nearly 20 minutes. His throat felt dry, his palms slick. He thought of Granson's words: don't muddy a passable project with scraps of the other thing. He thought of the red slash across his title. He thought of how he had been erased in front of everyone. He thought of his father's note: Signal hates pride. It goes where it can go. Marcus clicked send. The next morning, Dr. Holloway replied almost instantly. Received. Forwarding to JPL contact today. Marcus's stomach dropped. He closed his laptop and sat still in his chair, breathing shallowly. He had done it. He had sent his voice out. He whispered into the empty room, please don't let it disappear. The school day passed like a fog. Granson lectured about basic physics, praising Ellison for an answer Marcus knew was half-formed. Marcus didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. His voice was elsewhere now, coursing through wires and servers, sitting in boxes far beyond Jefferson High. Devin nudged him at lunch. You look like you swallowed a grenade. Marcus laughed, hollow. I might have. That night, as Marcus sat at his desk staring at the dark window, his phone buzzed again. An email from Holloway. They've read your notes. Debate ongoing. Some claim too advanced for student work. Others think it's fresh perspective worth deeper look. My NASA contact wants permission to reference your framework in internal discussions. Anonymous for now. But it would mean quoting you. Marcus's pulse quickened. Quoted. In NASA discussions. His words in rooms he wasn't even allowed to imagine. But the fear came back sharp. If they quoted him, what if someone traced it? What if it became public that the so-called innovative researcher was just a 17-year-old black kid from Jefferson High? Would they dismiss it? Would they call him a fraud? He typed slowly. You can share, but please, no name, not yet. He sent the reply, then buried his face in his hands. Recognition was brushing against him, but it was like touching fire through glass. He wanted it and dreaded it all at once. Down the hall, Elaine sat in the darkened living room, listening to the faint tap of his keys. She whispered into the stillness, as if speaking to Marcus's absent father. They're starting to hear him. Don't let them break him before he believes it himself. In a quiet office hundreds of miles away, Dr. Holloway clicked forward on Marcus's equations, attaching them to a chain with the subject line, Potential Novel Framework for DSN Communications. The next recipient wasn't just another academic. It was a NASA engineer who had been waiting for a fresh voice. And when that engineer opened the file, he didn't just see equations. He saw the future. The forwarded email landed quietly inside a NASA inbox at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Subject line plain and unassuming. Potential Novel Framework for DSN Communications. It joined a flood of memos, simulation results, and bureaucratic chatter that filled the server every hour. Most messages sank unseen, but this one was flagged by a colleague of Dr. Holloway's, a systems engineer named Dr. Karen Liu, who had been searching for anything fresh to break through the stagnation of deep space communication models. She opened the attachment, expecting jargon-stuffed fluff. Another overeager grad student, dressing old ideas in new language. Instead, as her eyes ran over the first page, her posture straightened. The framework wasn't vague theorizing. It was structured, coherent, and startlingly clean. She read, predictive compression, transmit deltas, not redundancies. Adaptive error correction. Scale parity with solar activity and distance. Relay net efficiency. Short bursts, long single path. Karen frowned, leaning closer. It was elegant. Almost too elegant. By noon she had printed the equations and spread them across her desk. A colleague walking past stopped. What's that? Karen tapped the page. Something forwarded from Midwestern State. Anonymous student. Supposedly high school. The colleague raised an eyebrow. High school? That's what the researcher claims. The man chuckled. Dismissive. Then it's copy-pasted. Undergrad maybe. More likely grad. Nobody in high school is writing this. Karen didn't answer. She was already running a quick simulation on her terminal. The numbers moved across the screen in green lines of code. When the results stabilized, her chest tightened. The compression ratio wasn't perfect, but it was closer than anything currently in use. She sat back, stunned. What if it is original? The next day, she brought the printouts to a roundtable review. Around the table sat engineers from communications, data science, and propulsion, hard-nosed veterans who prided themselves on skepticism. Anonymous submission, Karen began, sliding the pages across. Came through Dr. Holloway at Midwestern State. He vouches it's not plagiarized. He says the student claims high school. A murmur of disbelief circled the room. Dr. Patel, the oldest at the table, scanned the equations and smirked. High school? Please. I've seen PhDs botch simpler derivations. But the math holds. Karen said evenly. I ran a quick model. Compression efficiency improved by nearly 12% under standard DSN constraints. That silenced the room for a moment. Then Dr. Patel leaned forward. 12% with idealized inputs. Did you model solar flare interference? Yes, Karen said. The adaptive redundancy scaled exactly as proposed. Minimal data loss. More murmurs, this time not so dismissive. Dr. Hernandez, younger and sharper, tapped the schematic of the relay net. This part, short burst relays, instead of long transmissions. That's been theorized, but the way it's articulated here, concise, almost intuitive. He looked up. Whoever wrote this, it doesn't read like they're trying to impress. It reads like they've lived with the problem. Dr. Patel frowned, unconvinced. Or like they copied it from someone who has. Karen pressed her palms flat on the table. So let's test it properly. If it breaks, we toss it. If it holds, then we figure out how a so-called high school student saw what we didn't. The review team ran simulations for days. Data packets were compressed, noise models added, relay constellations sketched in code. Each time the framework bent but didn't break. Loss rates dipped, efficiency climbed, skepticism turned into irritation into grudging respect. Still, no one could reconcile the source. In one meeting, Hernandez said what others avoided. Maybe the disbelief isn't about the math. Maybe it's about us. We're trained to assume a certain face, a certain degree, a certain pedigree. Anything else feels impossible. Patel snorted. Don't turn this into politics. It's about rigor. Rigor we tested, Hernandez replied sharply, and the math passed. The silence that followed was heavy. Because underneath the academic language was a truth they all recognized, but rarely named. Disbelief often came not from equations, but from the body people imagined had written them. Meanwhile, at Jefferson High, Marcus lived unaware. In room 204, he sat through lectures where Ellison was praised for describing orbits like they were trivia questions. Caroline got nods for surface-level research on private space travel. And Marcus, once again, kept his hand down. When Mr. Granson looked his way, it was only to say, "You're awfully quiet, Ellison. Participation still counts." Marcus forced a neutral smile. "Yes, sir." The class chuckled. The teacher moved on. To them he was still the boy who avoided engagement. Invisible in plain sight. He had no idea that thousands of miles away, engineers were running his midnight equations through supercomputers. Back at JPL, Karen drafted an internal memo. Unverified framework demonstrates consistent improvement in DSN simulations. Recommend mention in upcoming press release as evidence of innovative approaches under review. She hesitated at the next line. Should she note that the author was supposedly a high school student? She deleted the sentence, then restored it, then deleted it again. Finally, she wrote, "Author currently anonymous. Source credibility pending." She sent the draft up the chain. That evening her manager replied, "Include in next briefing. Keep anonymity, if real attribution can follow. If false, it dies quietly." The next morning, Karen sat in the conference room as the communications director outlined talking points for the press. "We want to emphasize innovation, openness to new perspectives, If we say we're looking at fresh frameworks, even if preliminary, it boosts morale, shows we're not stagnant. We say we're looking at fresh frameworks, even if preliminary, it boosts morale, shows we're not stagnant. Karen handed over the memo. The director skimmed it, underlined a phrase and said, "Good. We'll cite this anonymous submission. Keep it vague. Just enough to hint at new thinking." Dr. Patel muttered, "God help us if it turns out to be a prank." "Then it dies in silence," the director said. "But if it isn't," he looked at Karen, "then we've just opened the door to something big." That night, Karen sat alone in her office, staring at the equations once more. She whispered to herself, "Who are you?" She imagined the faceless author, a grad student in hiding, a foreign researcher using a pseudonym, maybe even just maybe a high school kid staring at the same night sky with the same questions she once had. She closed the folder and locked it in her drawer. Tomorrow, the press release would go out. Tomorrow, the anonymous voice would step into the public eye without ever stepping into the room. At the same time, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, revising his forum replies. He corrected a small error someone pointed out, clarified his compression function, thanked a stranger in Spain for suggesting a variable he hadn't considered. His mother watched him from the doorway, arms folded, eyes soft. "You look lighter," she said. Marcus looked up. "Do I? Like the silence isn't as heavy on you." He smiled faintly. Maybe because someone's actually listening. He closed the laptop and looked out the window. The stars were faint, blurred by city glow. But he whispered anyway, "Go where you can go." In a NASA newsroom the following morning, a draft press release was finalized. Buried midway down, a sentence read, "Recent simulations, based on an anonymous independent submission, suggest promising improvements in deep space communication efficiency." One line, small and almost invisible, but it meant that Marcus's midnight equations, still hidden from his classmates, still erased in room 24, were about to echo across the world. The NASA newsroom released the statement at 8:01 a.m. Eastern Time, tucked between updates on telescope maintenance and routine mission schedules. It wasn't meant to be flashy, just another line in a government bulletin. But inside one paragraph, midway through the text, sat a sentence that would change everything. Recent internal simulations, based on an anonymous submission from a young independent thinker, suggest promising advances in communication efficiency for deep space satellites. While preliminary, these findings offer a glimpse of innovation that could transform our approach to long-distance data transmission. That was all. No name, no diagram, just a hint, an anonymous voice, acknowledged by NASA itself. At Jefferson High, Marcus sat in the library during study hall, scrolling on the battered school computer. The forum thread he had started was alive with chatter, dozens of new posts stacked on top of each other. Links, screenshots, speculation. One post stopped him cold. NASA cites anonymous submission in latest press release. Sounds awfully close to what Ellison posted last week. He clicked the link. His stomach clenched as the official NASA page opened. There it was. The sentence, simple and clinical, but unmistakably his. His words translated into institutional voice. He leaned back in the creaky chair, breath caught in his chest. It felt unreal, like reading about a stranger who happened to share his thoughts. He read it again, slower this time, tracing each word. Young independent thinker. Anonymous submission. Anonymous, he whispered under his breath. That word kept him hidden, safe. But it also stung, like being seen through a foggy window, never fully in focus. Devon slid into the chair beside him, dropping a math workbook with a thud. "You see this?" He shoved his phone toward Marcus. The screen glowed with the NASA press release. Marcus swallowed.
"Yeah, I saw."
Devon's grin was wide. "Wild. That's you, man. That's literally you." "They didn't use my name." "Who cares? They quoted your brain. Do you understand what this means?" Marcus hesitated, voice low. "It means they'll start asking who it is. And when they find out it's me, just a black kid from Jefferson High, they'll think it's a mistake." Devon leaned closer, his tone sharp. "No. They'll know it's a mistake they ignored you this long." Marcus didn't answer. His hands trembled on the keyboard. Across the internet, the story spread faster than NASA expected. Science blogs picked it up. Hungry for fresh narratives, headlines framed it with intrigue. NASA cites mystery innovator in new communication study. Anonymous submission challenges old models. On Twitter hashtags bloomed. Anonymous genius. NASA find. Who is it? Some users speculated it was a grad student leaking research. Others guessed a disgruntled NASA engineer. A few joked it was an alien sending instructions. The anonymity made it mythic. One tech journalist tweeted, "Somewhere out there, a kid or a genius just had the best day of their life." Marcus read that tweet 3 times. His chest ached. That evening at home, Elaine found him at the table, laptop open, hands pressed against his temples. "Baby," she said softly, "you're shaking." He looked up, eyes wide. "They published me. They actually published me." Elaine sat across from him, reaching for his hands. "Of course they did." "No," he said quickly. "You don't understand. It's NASA. The thing I've dreamed about since I was 8. The place I thought was galaxies away. They quoted me, Mom. Me." His voice cracked on the last word. Elaine squeezed his hands. "And yet they still don't know your name." Marcus nodded slowly. "It's like I'm here and not here at the same time." Her eyes softened. "Sometimes being unseen is armor. Sometimes it's a wound. Only you can decide which it is now." The next day, room 204 buzzed with chatter. Allison waved his phone, grinning. "Yo, did you guys see this? NASA cited some independent submission." "Crazy, right?" Caroline chimed in. "People online think it's some secret grad student. Or like a rogue scientist." Granson smiled faintly. "Likely a publicity stunt. NASA thrives on these little mysteries. Keeps the public engaged." Marcus sat in silence, staring at his notebook. His heart hammered as laughter and speculation filled the room. His words were circling above them, in headlines, in threads, in official NASA language, and still here, he was invisible. When class ended, Granson called after him. "Ellison." Marcus froze. The teacher tilted his head. "You've been unusually quiet. I'd like to see more effort. Participation still matters, no matter what's distracting you outside this classroom." Marcus met his gaze for half a beat, then looked away. "Yes, sir." Granson smiled, satisfied, and dismissed him. Marcus walked out with his fists tight at his sides. Participation still matters. The irony made his chest burn. That night, the forum thread reached over 1,000 replies. Someone had posted screenshots of the NASA press release, with arrows pointing to Marcus's exact phrasing from his schematic. The comments were a storm. "It's gotta be M. Ellison. Who are you, man? Grad student? Professor? If you're reading this, speak up. Don't let them steal your credit." Marcus scrolled until his vision blurred. Anonymous praise felt like oxygen and suffocation at once. They wanted him to step into the light, but stepping out meant exposing himself to doubt, dismissal, or worse, mockery that had haunted him before. Elaine appeared at his door with 2 mugs of cocoa. "Still at it?" He nodded, eyes locked on the screen. "They're guessing. Some already think it's me." Elaine handed him a mug. "What do you want to do?" Marcus gripped the warm ceramic. "I want them to know it's me. But I'm scared the moment they do, they'll stop believing the work." Elaine sat beside him, her voice low and steady. "If they stop believing just because it's you, then it was never about the work. It was about who they thought had the right to speak." He stared into the cocoa, steam fogging his glasses. "What if I'm not strong enough for that?" She reached out, brushing his cheek like she had when he was little. "Then you borrow my strength until you find yours." The following morning, science journalists flooded social media with think pieces. Could anonymous genius be the next Tsiolkovsky? The power of independent voices in science. Even mainstream outlets like CNN and BBC picked up the line. At Jefferson High, students scrolled headlines during class. "This is nuts," Allison muttered. "Imagine being the guy behind it. He's probably getting calls from NASA right now." Marcus hunched over his desk, biting back a smile that threatened to betray him. Devon, 2 rows back, caught his eye and shook his head slightly, as if to say, "Not yet. Don't let them take it before you're ready." That evening, another email arrived from Dr. Holloway. "Marcus, confirmation that JPL has included your framework in their press release. Reaction is strong. Journalists already requesting more details. They'll push for attribution soon. I promised anonymity, but it won't hold forever. Prepare yourself." Marcus read the words 3 times. "Prepare yourself." His pulse pounded in his ears. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground solid but the air rushing to pull him forward. He whispered, "I'm not ready." But deep down, a part of him knew readiness wasn't the point. The signal had already left. It was traveling now, bouncing across the world, impossible to call back. By midnight, the press release had gone viral. Hashtags trended, articles speculated, and somewhere on a science blog in California, a journalist posted the question that would ignite the hunt. Who is the anonymous genius NASA just quoted? The world wanted a name, and Marcus realized, with a chill, that hiding would only get harder from here. By Monday morning, Jefferson High was humming with a rumor no one could ignore. Phones glowed in hallways, heads bent over glowing screens, voices sharp with speculation. NASA's mysterious independent submission had leaked from science blogs into mainstream feeds, and students were buzzing about the anonymous genius who had apparently outsmarted professionals. Marcus felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air, like static before a storm. When he stepped into room 204, Caroline was already leaning across her desk toward Allison, whispering, "It says right here, NASA actually quoted this person. Whoever they are, they're like rewriting space communication." Allison snorted, loud enough for half the class to hear. "Yeah, right. It's probably some old guy with nothing better to do. Or a hoax." Another student chimed in. "No, dude. I read the press release. It's real. They said simulations showed improvements." Caroline's eyes widened. "So it's real. Imagine being that person." From the front, Mr. Granson adjusted his tie, waiting for silence before starting class. But he couldn't ignore the chatter either. He smiled tightly, stepping forward. "Ah, yes. I see you've all been caught up in the little NASA fairy tale floating around online." The class chuckled. "Let's be clear," Granson continued, tone sharp but casual. "NASA loves to dangle mysteries. Anonymous innovators, secret breakthroughs. It's public relations, nothing more. Keeps the taxpayers happy." Someone in the back muttered, "But what if it's legit?" Granson shook his head, amused. "Children, let me be perfectly blunt. No high schooler, no amateur tinkerer, no anonymous poster is producing equations that professional teams haven't already tested. Trust me, I've spent years in this field. It's smoke and mirrors." Laughter rippled across the room. A boy near Marcus whispered loudly enough to carry. "Yeah, like some kid sitting in his bedroom is gonna beat NASA." Marcus's throat tightened. He gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles whitened, his poster board memory flashing hot behind his eyes. His work wasn't smoke. It wasn't mirrors. It had survived simulations at JPL. But sitting in room 204, hearing the word children, he felt 16 again. Not the boy who had touched NASA's servers with his midnight equations, but the one erased with a red slash and a smirk. Granson paced slowly. "So while it's fun to imagine a mystery genius, let's keep our heads on Earth. Focus on real science, not fairy tales." The dismissal stung deeper than anger. It wasn't just doubt. It was the confidence of someone who had already decided who was allowed to be brilliant. Marcus kept his head down, staring at the notebook on his desk. His equations filled pages inside it, clean and alive, while his classmates laughed around him. He imagined standing up, shouting, "It's me, you're wrong." He imagined their faces, disbelief curdling into ridicule. Granson smirking as if to say, "See, told you so." So he stayed silent. Silence was safer. At lunch the buzz hadn't died down. Devon slid beside him at their usual table, phone in hand. "They're obsessed, man. Half the cafeteria's playing detective. You hear what Zoe said?" Marcus shook his head. "She swears it's someone at North State. Says her brother's friend knows a grad student working on the same stuff." Devon smirked. "They're hunting everywhere but here." Marcus picked at his food. "Good." Devon's smile faded. "Good? If they knew it was me." Marcus trailed off. Devon leaned closer, voice low. "If they knew it was you, maybe they'd stop laughing." Marcus met his eyes, voice barely audible. "Or maybe they'd laugh harder." Devon sat back, frustrated but gentle. "You don't get it. They're already laughing because they don't know. Imagine what happens when they do." Marcus didn't answer. That evening, Marcus scrolled the forum on his laptop. The pinned thread had exploded past 2,000 replies. People argued fiercely, some defending the framework, others insisting it had to be stolen. One comment cut him. "Bet it's just some kid pretending. NASA wouldn't waste time otherwise." His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to respond, to defend himself. But he closed the laptop instead. Defending himself meant revealing himself. Revealing himself meant stepping into the storm. Elaine noticed his slump as she passed by. "What's wrong?" "They're arguing if it's real." "If I'm real." She sat beside him, brushing his shoulder. Baby, people argue with the sun too. Doesn't stop it from rising. Marcus smiled faintly, but the weight stayed. What if the sun burns out before anyone believes? Then you'll still know you shine. The next morning, the hallways buzzed louder. Someone had printed the NASA press release and taped it to lockers. Headlines circled on Instagram stories with captions like, "Anonymous genius and wish it was me." In room 204, Granson returned to the topic with a smirk. So, still clinging to your NASA ghost story? Let's be reasonable. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And anonymous claims? He shook his head. They're nothing but shadows. Caroline raised her hand. But what if it really was someone young? Wouldn't that be possible? Granson laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that dismissed the very question. Caroline, science is not a fairy tale. High schoolers don't rewrite physics. Not here, not anywhere. The room chuckled with him. Marcus sat frozen, his notebook heavy in his lap. His silence roared in his ears. That night, a twist came. Marcus refreshed the forum and found a new post, not in the thread, but in his private inbox. The subject line, inquiry, confirmation needed. The message was short, clipped, professional. We're preparing a piece on NASA's press release for the Herald Science Desk. Your username M. Ellison matches details in the forum submission. Can you confirm authorship, on or off the record? Marcus's heart slammed. A journalist. He read it twice, 3 times. The Herald wasn't a blog. It was a newspaper with reach, credibility. If he replied, the mask of anonymity would crack. If he stayed silent, someone else might claim his work. Elaine entered his room with a laundry basket. What's that look? A reporter emailed me. She set the basket down slowly. A reporter? They know my username. They're asking if it's me. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. What do you want to do? Marcus's voice trembled. I don't know. If I say yes, the whole world will know. If I say nothing, they might never believe it's mine. Elaine sat beside him, gripping his shoulders. You've been invisible long enough. But baby, once you step into that light, you can't go back. Marcus stared at the glowing screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat in the dark. With trembling hands, Marcus hovered over the reply button, knowing that a single word, yes, could turn his life inside out. Outside, the world was already searching for the anonymous genius. Now the world was knocking on his door. The email from the Herald sat open on Marcus's laptop, its black text stark against the white screen. Can you confirm authorship, on or off the record? The blinking cursor in the reply box felt like a spotlight daring him to move. Elaine stood beside him, arms folded, her face a blend of pride and fear. You don't owe anyone your voice, she said gently. But you also don't owe them your silence. Marcus swallowed hard. His whole life had been framed by silence, by hands never called on, by teachers who praised mediocrity and ignored precision, by the quiet ache of knowing his ideas mattered but never counted. Now, for the first time, someone wanted to hear him. Not just a forum stranger, not just an anonymous thread, but the press. His fingers hovered over the keys. He typed one word, yes, then froze. He erased it. Typed again, I can confirm. I am the author of the equations cited in NASA's press release. He hesitated, his chest pounding. Then he added, my name is Marcus Ellison. I am a 17-year-old student at Jefferson High School. He hit send before he could change his mind. The world shifted within 48 hours. A small but respected science magazine, The Chronicle of Space and Technology, published an article under the headline, Meet the Anonymous Innovator, 17-year-old high schooler credited in NASA breakthrough. The story spread fast, quicker than anyone anticipated. It told of a teenager who had spent nights scribbling equations in a worn notebook, who had shared his work on an online forum under the name M. Ellison, and whose model had been quietly reviewed, tested, and acknowledged by NASA engineers. The article included a grainy photo Elaine had provided, Marcus at age 14, peering through a second-hand telescope on their apartment balcony. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. The caption read, from bedroom to breakthrough, Marcus Ellison's ideas travel further than his voice ever could. Marcus read the piece in stunned silence. He hadn't expected it to feel like this. His story was out there, his name in bold, his age emphasized, his school listed. He scrolled past his own words, quoted in paragraphs, past explanations of his framework simplified for lay readers. Devon burst into his room without knocking, waving his phone. Drew. Drew. You're everywhere. Google your name. Right now. Marcus did. Headlines stacked like dominoes. NASA's anonymous genius is a teenager from Jefferson High. Black high school student cracks satellite code. 17-year-old challenges NASA's thinking. Marcus's breath caught. He had been invisible yesterday. Today he was a headline. At school the reaction was instant. Students crowded the hallways with phones out, shoving screens in each other's faces. Yo, this is him, someone whispered. That's Marcus. Look. Caroline stopped him at his locker, eyes wide. Is it true you're the anonymous one? Marcus hesitated, then nodded once. She gasped, her voice carrying across the hall. It's him. He's the one. Heads turned, phones lifted, whispers became shouts. No way. That's crazy. How? Ellison pushed through the crowd, eyes narrowed. This some kind of joke? Marcus didn't flinch. No joke. The disbelief on Ellison's face curdled into something sharper. Then NASA's standards must be slipping. He spat the words, like sour fruit, then turned away. Marcus felt the sting, but before he could sink into it, Devon stepped up beside him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Keep walking, man. Let him choke on it. In room 2-4 the atmosphere was electric. Students buzzed, passing phones under desks, reading quotes aloud. It literally says Marcus Ellison, one girl whispered. Right here in the article. Mr. Granson entered with his usual composure, but the energy in the room was impossible to ignore. He adjusted his glasses, set his briefcase on the desk, and raised his hands for quiet. Settle down, everyone. We have a lesson to get through. But the whispers didn't fade. Caroline raised her hand, bold for once. Mr. Granson, is it true? Did NASA really quote Marcus? The teacher's face stiffened. He forced a chuckle. Children, let's not get carried away by media sensationalism. NASA releases plenty of fluff pieces to keep the public entertained. But it's in the Chronicle, another student interjected. And CNN, and BBC. It's everywhere. Granson's smile grew thinner. Articles exaggerate. And even if some framework was mentioned, do you honestly believe a high schooler produced something groundbreaking? Be serious. A ripple of laughter swept the room, but it wasn't the easy laughter of before. It was uneasy, fractured. Some students laughed because they always did, when Granson dismissed someone. Others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking toward Marcus, their certainty shaken. Marcus sat still, notebook closed on his desk. He wanted to speak, to confirm, to say, it's mine, it's real. But he stayed silent, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't need Granson's validation anymore. The world already knew. That afternoon Marcus and Elaine were eating dinner when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the door. Elaine exchanged a look with her son before opening it. 2 reporters stood in the hallway, badges hanging from their necks, microphones in hand. A cameraman hovered behind them. Good evening, one said. We're with Channel 9 News. We're here to speak with Marcus Ellison, the student credited in NASA's latest release. Do you have a moment? Elaine stiffened, protective instinct flashing in her eyes. This is our home, she said firmly. We won't have cameras in here without warning. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. It's okay, Mom. The reporter lowered her microphone slightly. Marcus, can you confirm you're the author of the equations NASA referenced? Marcus nodded. Yes, I am. The reporter's eyes widened slightly at his calm. How does it feel, being 17 and recognized by NASA? He took a breath, his father's words echoing in his mind. Signal hates pride. It goes where it can go. It feels, Marcus said slowly, like being heard for the first time. The reporter scribbled notes rapidly. Do you realize the impact this could have? Universities' research opportunities, maybe even NASA itself? Marcus glanced at Elaine, who gave him a tiny nod. I just want to keep asking questions, he said. That's all I've ever wanted. The cameras rolled. The words hung in the air, like a promise. By the next morning, the interview clip was online, spreading through local channels, and then national ones. At Jefferson High, students huddled in corners, replaying it on their phones. Marcus's face was everywhere, in headlines, in clips, in whispers. And in room 204, when Granson walked in, he found 2 reporters waiting outside his classroom, cameras aimed squarely at him. Mr. Granson? One asked, notebook ready. You were Marcus Ellison's teacher. Did you recognize his talent before NASA did? The color drained from Granson's face. For the first time, his smirk faltered. He opened his mouth to respond, but the class had already turned to watch. Marcus sat quietly at his desk, eyes forward, the room holding its breath. The camera stayed fixed on Granson, microphones thrust forward, while every student in room 204 leaned in. For years he had dismissed Marcus's hand, ignored his answers, struck through his ideas. Now the world wanted to know, what would he say about the genius he had tried so hard not to see? The cameras lingered in the hallway like heat, their red recording lights glowing steady. Students from other classes peeked around corners, whispering, phones raised to capture every second. Reporters stood firm outside room 204, their microphones extended like weapons, waiting for a crack in the polished surface of Jefferson High's most confident science teacher. Mr. Granson, the reporter repeated, voice sharp but professional. You've taught Marcus Ellison for nearly 2 years. Why wasn't his talent recognized earlier? Did you encourage his research? Granson adjusted his glasses, shifting behind his desk as if the familiar wood could shield him. He cleared his throat. Look, Marcus is a bright student. Very bright. But high school is about building foundations, not skipping steps. What he attempted was too advanced for someone at his level. I didn't want him to fail. The class was silent, hanging on every word. Marcus sat in the second row, his notebook closed on his desk, his face unreadable. Caroline raised her hand timidly, but didn't wait for permission. But you told us last week the whole NASA thing was fake. Granson blinked. Caught. I cautioned you against believing hype. Science is about skepticism. Allison snorted under his breath. Sounded more like you didn't believe it could be real. The camera swung toward Marcus, then back to the teacher. One reporter leaned forward. Are you saying you doubted the possibility not because of the math, but because of the student? Granson's jaw tightened. He gave the smallest smile he could muster, but his voice betrayed strain. Marcus often avoided engagement in class. He didn't raise his hand. He kept to himself. A teacher can't support what isn't visible. Every student in the room knew the lie for what it was. The silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was damning memory. They remembered the raised hands ignored, the answers cut off, the red line slashed across his proposal. Devon shifted in his chair, muttering loud enough to be heard. He was visible. You just didn't want to see him. A ripple went through the room. Phones tilted higher. By evening, the story had escaped the classroom. Parents demanded answers at the school board meeting, their voices rising in the cafeteria-turned auditorium. How does a student recognized by NASA get dismissed in his own classroom? One mother asked, gesturing sharply at the administrators lined up on stage. The principal shifted uncomfortably. We take these allegations seriously. Mr. Granson is an experienced educator. Experienced at what? Another parent interrupted. Erasing our kids? The words hit the room like a stone through glass. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras rolling. The administrators tried to restore order, but the narrative had slipped beyond their control. Elaine sat in the back row, Marcus beside her. She kept her hand firmly on his, steadying him. He didn't look up from the table, but he could hear the anger crackling around him. It wasn't just his fight anymore. It was everyone's. The next morning, room 204 felt less like a classroom and more like a courtroom. Students arrived buzzing, some defiant, some giddy. Marcus entered quietly, backpack slung over his shoulder, but whispers followed him like shadows. Granson stood at the front, shoulders stiff, eyes darting to the door where a journalist had been spotted waiting again. He forced his voice into calm. All right, everyone. Settle down. We need to focus on today's lesson. But no one opened a book. No one lifted a pencil. Caroline spoke first. Why didn't you believe him? Granson sighed. It's not about belief. It's about standards. Marcus was talented. Yes, but he wasn't ready to leap into professional-level research. Devon leaned forward. He was ready enough for NASA. The room erupted with murmurs. Marcus sat still, but the words tore through him. Not ready. The same refrain he'd lived under for years. Not ready to speak. Not ready to lead. Not ready to be seen. Yet somehow ready enough for the world beyond these walls. Later that day, a local news station aired a segment. The footage showed Marcus's face beside headlines. NASA quotes, local teen. Then it cut to a clip of Granson. His words replayed on loop. He wasn't ready. The anchor didn't soften it. Critics say Marcus Ellison's teacher dismissed his work due to bias, raising questions about how many other voices have been silenced in classrooms across America. Elaine watched the segment from their couch, her jaw tight. Marcus sat beside her, hugging a pillow to his chest. She turned to him. "You hear that? It's bigger than one classroom now." He nodded, voice quiet. "I didn't want it to be like this." She touched his shoulder. "Sometimes truth comes out messy, but it still comes out." By Thursday, national outlets had picked up the story. Major networks ran panels. Was Marcus ignored because of race? The silent cost of classroom bias. Teachers and experts debated on live television, while Marcus sat at his kitchen table, refreshing the screen in disbelief. Granson, cornered, gave a statement through the district. "Any implication of prejudice is deeply unfair. My role has always been to challenge students appropriately. Marcus is clearly talented, but my intent was to prepare him, not hinder him." The statement fooled no one. Social media shredded it within hours. Screenshots of Granson's dismissive comments from class captured by students on their phones circulated widely. Hashtags trended, "Let him speak," "Ignored genius," "See Marcus." For the first time, Marcus wasn't invisible. He was everywhere. On Friday morning, Marcus walked into school to find a small crowd outside the front entrance. Reporters, parents, even strangers holding signs. "Believe our kids. Stop silencing talent." As he pushed through, microphones crowded near. "Marcus, how does it feel to be dismissed by your teacher but praised by NASA?" He froze. The words cut sharper than any headline. Elaine, walking beside him, placed a hand on his back. "You don't have to answer." But Marcus looked up, voice steady. "It feels like I've lived two different lives at the same time. In one, I'm invisible. In the other, I'm seen. I'm still figuring out which one is real." The cameras captured every syllable. That afternoon, as he sat quietly in room 204, the intercom buzzed. "Marcus Ellison, please report to the principal's office." The class hummed with speculation. As Marcus stood, he walked down the hall, heart pounding, and stepped into the office, where Elaine was already waiting. The principal sat stiffly behind his desk, a sealed envelope on the table. "Marcus," he said carefully, "this came for you." Marcus picked it up, his fingers trembling as he opened the flap. Inside was a crisp letter on NASA letterhead. He read the words slowly, his voice catching on the first line. "Mr. Ellison, we would be honored to invite you to tour NASA headquarters and present your framework to our research team." Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. Marcus lowered the letter, stunned. "They want me to come." The principal cleared his throat, struggling for composure. "It seems, Marcus, that you have quite an opportunity ahead of you." Marcus sat in the chair, the letter clutched in his hands, his chest pounding with disbelief and something sharper, vindication. Word of the NASA invitation spread before the final bell. By dismissal, reporters were camped outside the school gates, waiting to capture his first words. And for the first time, Marcus realized he wasn't just carrying his own voice anymore. He was carrying everyone who had ever been told they weren't ready. The invitation letter felt heavier than paper should. Marcus carried it folded in his backpack, as if it were fragile glass, pulling it out at night, just to make sure the words hadn't vanished. "We would be honored to invite you to tour NASA headquarters and present your framework to our research team." Each time he read it, the same disbelief surged through him, followed quickly by fear. Elaine fussed over every detail. "We need to iron your shirt," she said the night before. "No stains on those shoes. And you're wearing a belt. Do you hear me, Marcus? A belt." He smiled nervously. "Mom, it's not the clothes they'll care about." "That's where you're wrong," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They'll care. People like them always care. You walk in there sharp, so the only thing they can see is your mind." Devon came by that evening, carrying a duffel bag with snacks and a half-broken portable charger. "In case you faint on the flight," he teased. But then his face softened. "Man, you're really doing this. NASA. Like NASA?" Marcus shrugged, trying to tamp down the swirl inside him. "Feels like I'm carrying a whole storm in my chest." "Good," Devon said. "Means you're about to change the weather." The flight to Washington, D.C. was Marcus's first time on a plane. He pressed his forehead against the window, as the ground fell away, neighborhoods shrinking into patchwork squares. The clouds swallowed him, and for a moment, he forgot the interviews, the headlines, the laughter in room 2. He was just a boy staring at the sky, the same sky he'd studied through a hand-me-down telescope. At the airport, A NASA liaison named Dr. Liu greeted them with a practiced smile and a firm handshake. "Marcus Ellison," she said warmly. "We're very glad you're here." Lane squeezed his shoulder as they walked through the terminal. "You hear that?" she whispered. "They're glad you're here." But Marcus only nodded, the words heavy with pressure. NASA headquarters was nothing like Jefferson High. Security checkpoints, glass doors that slid open at badges, walls lined with photographs of rockets and satellites. Marcus's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he followed Dr. Liu through winding corridors. Every turn felt like stepping further from invisibility. When they entered the conference room, the air shifted. Around the long table sat men and women, whose names he'd only seen in research papers. Equations and charts filled the screens. "Everyone," Dr. Liu said, "this is Marcus Ellison, the author of the redundancy compression framework we've been analyzing." Heads turned. Some curious, some skeptical. One man adjusted his glasses and muttered, 17, under his breath. Marcus sat down, hands folded tightly in his lap. He reminded himself of his father's words. "Signal hates pride. It goes where it can go." The meeting began with a projection of his equations. Seeing them displayed on NASA's screen made his chest ache with surreal wonder. The lead engineer explained, "We've run simulations. The efficiency gains are undeniable. What we need is to understand the thought process behind the model." All eyes turned to him. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice wavered at first, but steadied as he spoke. He explained how he'd studied JPL archives late at night, how he built pseudocode models on borrowed laptops, how he'd used scrap wires to test interference patterns. He spoke not like a student giving a report, but like someone who had lived inside the problem. Silence followed. Then Dr. Hernandez, the propulsion expert, leaned back in his chair. "Remarkable," he said simply. "Not polished, not textbook, but remarkable." Another scientist frowned. "But how do we validate authorship? How do we know he didn't lift this from an unpublished draft?" The question landed sharp. Marcus's stomach twisted. He wanted to shout. "Because it came from me, from my nights, from my notebooks that nobody wanted to read." But he stayed composed. Elaine, sitting in the corner, straightened her back. "I can vouch for every page," she said firmly. "I've seen him write it. I've seen him fall asleep over it. Nobody gave him these ideas. He made them." The room fell quiet again. Slowly, doubt gave way to cautious respect. After the meeting, they toured the communications lab. Screens glowed with live telemetry, lines of data pulsing like veins. Marcus stood in awe as an engineer pointed to a live feed from a probe millions of miles away. "Every number here," the man said, "comes from signals battling noise across space." Marcus pressed his palms against the railing, whispering almost to himself, "And we can teach the noise to behave." The engineer glanced at him, then back at the screen. "Maybe we can," he said thoughtfully. In the cafeteria, scientists approached him with questions, some technical, some personal. One woman leaned down and asked, "Do you realize what you've done?" Marcus shook his head. "I just wanted to be heard." "You will be," she said. Later they brought him into a smaller office, where a draft report lay on the table. His framework was outlined, annotated with NASA's own testing notes. Dr. Liu turned to him. "Marcus, we'd like you to co-author a paper with us. It would detail your framework, our validation, and its implications for deep space communication." Marcus blinked. "Co-author? Yes," Dr. Liu said. "Your name beside ours. Your contribution recognized, not hidden." Elaine gasped softly, pressing her hands to her face. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. Just months ago, his teacher had slashed through his proposal with red ink. Now NASA wanted to stamp his name into history. He whispered, almost afraid the words might vanish if he said them too loudly. "You want my name on your paper?" Dr. Liu smiled. "No, we want your name on your paper. We're just honored to stand beside it." The weight of it was overwhelming. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor himself. He thought of the laughter in room 204, of Allison's smirk, of Granson's dismissals. He thought of the notebook under his pillow, pages smudged with midnight determination. Now those same pages were about to become part of something eternal. As the meeting ended, Dr. Liu handed him a folder with the draft paper. The front page bore the title, "Adaptive Redundancy and Predictive Compression for Deep Space Networks," and beneath it, two words Marcus had never seen in print before: by Marcus Ellison. The auditorium lights dimmed, the NASA insignia glowing like a beacon on the towering screen behind the stage. Rows of cameras pointed toward the podium, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. The event had been billed as a celebration of innovation, a showcase of breakthroughs in aerospace research. But for Marcus, seated nervously in the front row beside Elaine, it felt like something more. It felt like Judgment Day. Elaine squeezed his hand. "Breathe," she whispered. He nodded, but his chest was tight. He glanced around the vast room filled with scientists, reporters, and dignitaries in tailored suits. The air buzzed with importance. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. Yet the weight of being visible felt almost unbearable. The host, a senior NASA administrator with a steady voice and a polished smile, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor not only our history, but the future, the minds that will carry us deeper into space than ever before." Applause rippled through the hall. Marcus felt his pulse race, each clap striking like a drumbeat in his chest. The administrator continued. "In recent weeks you may have read about a promising framework for deep space communication. What began as an anonymous submission has since been validated through rigorous testing. Tonight we are proud to tell you the name behind the work." Elaine gasped softly, her grip on Marcus's hand tightening. 17-year-old Marcus Ellison. The room erupted. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Voices rose in astonishment. Marcus sat frozen, his name echoing off the walls, rolling through the speakers. For years it had gone unheard in room 204. Now it filled an auditorium. Elaine covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, but Marcus caught it. "They finally hear you." Marcus rose slowly, guided by Dr. Liu toward the stage. The applause didn't fade. It grew, cresting like a wave. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he walked, every step heavy with memory. Ignored hands, the red slash across his proposal. The laughter of classmates who had been trained to believe brilliance had only one face. When he reached the podium, the administrator gestured toward the screen. Behind him, in massive letters, appeared the title, "Adaptive Redundancy and Predictive Compression for Deep Space Networks." Beneath it, by Marcus Ellison. The administrator smiled. "Marcus, before we invite you to speak, we'd like to share the line that struck us most when we first read your submission." He lifted a page and read aloud. "A probe can learn its own noise. It can whisper when the story hasn't changed, and shout only when it matters." The words rang out across the hall. Marcus's words, the ones that had lived in his notebook, dismissed as too ambitious, now amplified by NASA's microphone. They drew nods of respect, murmurs of admiration. Marcus blinked hard, trying to steady himself. It wasn't just the recognition, it was the vindication. His once silenced sentences now carried on sound waves stronger than any erasure. The administrator stepped aside, motioning for him to speak. Marcus gripped the podium, hands trembling, heart pounding. He leaned toward the microphone. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he began. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. "A year ago, my ideas fit in a notebook no one wanted to read. My questions went unanswered in class. Sometimes silence can feel louder than rejection." The room was hushed, the silence now reverent, instead of erasing. But I kept writing. I kept asking, not because I thought someone would listen, but because I couldn't stop hearing the questions in my own head. And tonight, to have those same words not just heard but valued, it means everything. Elaine's tears flowed openly, her shoulders shaking. A reporter in the front row lowered her camera for a moment, eyes wet, caught by the honesty in his voice. Marcus took a breath, his chest loosening. "I want every kid who's ever felt invisible to know you're not noise. You're the signal. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Applause thundered again, but it was different this time. Not polite, not obligatory, full, powerful, rising to the ceiling. After the ceremony, as Marcus stood backstage, scientists approached one after another. Some congratulated him, others asked technical questions, scribbling notes as he spoke. For the first time, people leaned in when he answered, instead of looking past him. Elaine hugged him tightly, whispering, "Your father would have been so proud. He'd say you turned silence into a star map." Marcus pressed his forehead against hers, whispering back, "We did it, Mom." The broadcast aired live across the country. In living rooms, classrooms, and offices, people watched the teenager who had once been invisible stand tall under NASA's spotlight. At Jefferson High, Room 204 was unusually silent. The TV in the corner played the live stream, the entire class glued to the screen. Marcus's voice filled the room where it had once been smothered. At his desk, Mr. Granson sat stiff, pale-faced. His smirk was gone. His hand, usually steady on a marker, twitched slightly as he reached for a pen and set it back down. Students glanced at him, then back at the screen. They remembered his words. Too ambitious, not ready. Stay in your lane. They remembered his laughter, his dismissals. And now they watched Marcus's words, quoted by NASA, his name spoken with reverence. Granson stared at the screen, his lips pressed tight, color drained from his face. For once he had nothing to say. The broadcast ended with a NASA spokesperson announcing, "This is only the beginning. Marcus Ellison will co-author our upcoming paper." The room at Jefferson High erupted in whispers. But Granson didn't move. He sat frozen, pale and silent, as if the weight of his erasure had finally landed. The night after the NASA ceremony, Marcus sat at his desk in the same small room where it had all begun. The stage lights, the applause, the cameras, it all felt distant now, like a dream too bright to hold. What was real, what was solid, was the quiet hum of the lamp and the weight of the old notebook beneath his hand. He pulled it out, the pages worn soft from years of use. Ink smudges stained the corners, equations sprawled across margins, arrows pointing to possibilities no one had cared to ask about. It smelled faintly of pencil graphite and sleepless nights. He opened it to the first page he'd ever filled. The handwriting was shakier, smaller, but the words were still clear. What if signals could whisper instead of shout? Marcus ran his fingers over the faded pencil lines, remembering the night he'd written them. He had been 16, sitting alone while the world around him chose not to see. Now those same words had traveled into a NASA press release, broadcast across the world. But the question that haunted him wasn't how far his voice had gone. It was how close it had come to being lost forever. Elaine appeared in the doorway, a steaming mug of tea in her hand. She leaned against the frame, watching him. "Back to the notebook?" He nodded. "It's where it started. Feels wrong to leave it behind." She set the mug beside him. "Maybe it's not about leaving it. Maybe it's about writing the next chapter." Marcus looked up, his voice quiet. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't posted online that night? If I'd just stopped?" Elaine's eyes softened. "I think about it all the time, and it scares me. Because you almost believed their silence meant you didn't matter." He swallowed hard. "What if other kids believe it? What if they never get out?" Her hand rested on his shoulder. "That's why you don't stop here. You keep going. For them." The following week, the co-authorship announcement hit scientific journals. Ellison, M. with, Liu, K. Hernandez, R. and Patel, adaptive redundancy and predictive compression for deep space networks. His name sat beside veterans with decades of experience. For Marcus, it was validation. For the world, it was a shock. Articles poured out, not just about his discovery but about the larger question: how many Marcus Ellisons had been overlooked before? At Jefferson High, students whispered differently now. Not laughter, not disbelief. Questions. Caroline confessed to him in the hallway. "I used to think you were quiet because you didn't know the answers. Now I realize maybe you didn't speak because no one wanted to listen." Allison avoided him, his smirk replaced with silence. But silence, Marcus realized, could mean many things. Sometimes power, sometimes shame. Granson, however, remained a figure of unease. When reporters returned for follow-ups, his face appeared on local broadcasts, carefully worded statements about rigor and standards ringing hollow against the reality of Marcus's achievement. He had become a cautionary tale, the teacher who couldn't see the genius in his own classroom. One evening, Marcus passed by room 204. After hours, the lights were still on. Through the glass, he saw Granson at his desk, papers scattered, staring blankly at the whiteboard. For a fleeting second, Marcus almost pitied him. Almost, but pity couldn't erase the years of being silenced. He walked on. NASA sent him drafts to review, pages of technical data threaded with his own framework. They invited him to join video conferences, where scientists from around the world addressed him not as a student but as a peer. Yet no matter how high the recognition reached, Marcus always came back to the same notebook. He filled new pages with equations, yes, but also with reflections, thoughts about silence, about bias, about resilience. The notebook became less a collection of ideas and more a record of survival. One night, he wrote in the margin, "A signal isn't lost just because one receiver refuses to hear it." At a small local library event, organized in his honor, Marcus spoke to a group of students younger than him. He held the notebook in his hand as he spoke. "This," he said, holding it up, "was where I started. Nobody in my classroom wanted to hear it, but I kept writing anyway. Because sometimes the world won't give you a microphone. You have to build your own." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "But what if no one ever listens?" Marcus smiled gently. "Then you write louder. You write clearer. Because someday somewhere, the right receiver will hear you. And when they do, it changes everything." Elaine, watching from the back row, pressed a tissue to her eyes. She remembered the boy who once came home defeated, asking if his voice mattered at all. Tonight, she saw the answer written in the faces of every child leaning forward to hear him. But recognition brought responsibility. Emails flooded his inbox, young students sharing their own stories of being dismissed, ignored, written off. Some were black, some brown, some simply poor or different. Their words echoed his own. "Nobody sees me. Nobody believes me." Marcus read them late at night, feeling the weight of each one. He couldn't reply to them all, but he promised himself something as he closed the laptop. He would never let silence bury another voice if he could help it. One evening, sitting at his desk, he flipped back to the very first page of the notebook. He read his own uncertain handwriting, the question that had started it all. Then he picked up his pen, and beneath it wrote a new line. "Legacy isn't about being the first to speak. It's about making sure you're not the last." He sat back, staring at the words until they blurred with tears. Across town, in his living room, Mr. Granson watched another segment on the evening news. Marcus's face appeared on screen, alongside NASA officials praising his contributions. Granson's hand tightened around the remote. For years he had commanded a classroom with certainty. Now he was a spectator to a truth he had tried to erase. His face was pale, his body still, the weight of his failure pressing in. The broadcast cut to Marcus speaking at the library, notebook in hand, saying, "Don't let anyone convince you that you're noise." Granson clicked off the TV, the silence in his house deafening. Back in his room, Marcus closed the notebook gently, placing it on the shelf beside his bed. It was no longer just a place for equations. It was a record of transformation, a chronicle of a boy who had once been silenced but refused to vanish. He turned off the lamp, the glow fading into darkness. The stars outside his window shimmered faintly, distant yet steady. He whispered into the night, not as a plea but as a promise. "I'll keep going." And yet as he lay back, staring at the ceiling, one thought pierced the triumph. If it took all this for just one voice to be heard, how many voices remain ignored in classrooms every single day? They tried to erase him, but his voice rose louder than their silence. And his story isn't just his, it's every unheard student, every ignored hand, every dream dismissed. If you believe no one should be silenced because of who they are, type yes in the comments. And subscribe if you know this. Fight for justice isn't over.